In this video, we'll be breaking down When Lovers Are Killed Together, a series of stories as tragic as they are haunting. Let's get started. Starting it off with the Colonial Parkway Murders, 1986, 1989, Virginia, USA. The Colonial Parkway Murders, 1986, 1989, Virginia, USA. The Colonial Parkway Murders are one of Virginia's most haunting, unsolved cases. Between 1986 and 1989, at least 8 young people were killed along a scenic stretch of highway in southeastern Virginia. 4 couples either vanished or were found murdered in secluded areas along or near the Colonial Parkway, a 22-mile road that connects the historic sites of Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Yorktown. The killer targeted couples in isolated lovers' lane locations. The crimes were brutal, calculated, and left behind minimal evidence. What makes this case even more disturbing is that decades later, most of these murders remain unsolved. In January 2024, DNA evidence finally linked one suspect to some of the killings, but the complete picture of what happened along that dark parkway remains a mystery. To understand these murders, you need to understand the setting. The Colonial Parkway is a beautiful stretch of highway that cuts through the Colonial National Historical Park in southeastern Virginia. This area is steeped in American history. The parkway was designed as a scenic route, surrounded by dense forests and offering views of rivers and historical landmarks. Long stretches of the road have no streetlights. There are far fewer entries and exits than a typical highway. The isolation and natural beauty made it a popular spot for young couples looking for privacy. It was a lover's lane that felt safe because it was so peaceful and tied to such an important historical area. In the mid-1980s, the region around the Colonial Parkway was a relatively quiet place. The nearby towns of Williamsburg, Yorktown, and Newport News were home to military bases. Colleges like the College of William and Mary and Christopher Newport University, and regular working families. Young people in the area would drive to secluded spots along the parkway or nearby refuges to spend time alone. This was normal behavior for couples looking for privacy away from parents and roommates. Nobody expected that this tranquil, historically significant area would become the hunting ground for a serial killer. The first hint that something terrible was happening came in October 1986. At that time, there was no reason to suspect a pattern. It seemed like an isolated incident. But as the months and years went on, more couples disappeared or were found dead in eerily similar circumstances. The crimes shared disturbing patterns that suggested they were connected. Young couples, secluded locations, vehicles found in strange positions, minimal evidence, and no signs of robbery. The killer or killers seemed to have knowledge of the area and possibly even knowledge of police work. This made the investigation incredibly difficult. The terror began slowly, then built into something that gripped the entire region with fear. The first victims were Kathleen Marion Thomas, known as Kathy, and Rebecca Ann Dowski, known as Becky. Kathy was 27 years old and a graduate of the United States Naval Academy. She worked as a stockbroker in Norfolk, Virginia. Becky was 21 years old and a senior at the College of William and Mary, studying business management. The two women were in a romantic relationship. On the evening of October 9, 1986, Kathy and Becky were seen leaving a computer lab on the William and Mary campus around 6:30 in the evening. They were with friends earlier, but left to find somewhere more private to spend time together. Kathy had driven to the Colonial Parkway in the past to be alone with romantic partners, so this was a familiar spot for her. The two women disappeared that night. 3 days later, on the morning of October 12th, a jogger discovered a white 1980 Honda Civic at the bottom of an embankment at a location called the Cheatham Annex Overlook, about 7 miles east of Williamsburg. The car had veered off the road into thick, dense shrubbery. It was only a few feet from a 15-foot drop into the York River. When a highway patrolman arrived at the scene, he discovered the bodies of both women inside the vehicle. The details of the crime scene were disturbing. Both women had been strangled, They had rope burns on their necks and wrists. Their throats had been slashed. The car and their bodies had been doused in diesel fuel, and someone had attempted to set the vehicle on fire before pushing it down the embankment. The fire never fully caught, which preserved crucial evidence. Investigators immediately recognized this was not a random act of violence. This was calculated, brutal, and personal. The killer had taken time to stage the scene, but at this point, nobody knew this was just the beginning. About a year passed before the next confirmed victims appeared. On September 20th, 1987, 20-year-old David Knobling and 14-year-old Robin Edwards went out with a group of friends to see a movie and visit an arcade. David and Robin were in a romantic relationship despite their age difference. After making plans to meet up with friends later that evening, David and Robin drove in David's black Ford Ranger pickup truck across the James River Bridge from Newport News to the Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge. This was another secluded Lover's Lane spot on the south shore of the James River in Isle of Wight County, near Smithfield, Virginia. They were heading to a sandy parking area to be alone. 2 days later, on September 23rd, David's truck was found at the refuge parking area next to the James River Bridge. The truck was found with the wipers on and the radio playing. Some articles of clothing were inside the vehicle. That same day, David's father joined a search party, and they discovered 2 bodies along the water's edge of the James River. Both David and Robin had been shot in the back of the head at close range, execution style. David had also been shot once in the shoulder, suggesting he may have tried to run from the killer. Robin's pants were partially rolled down, and investigators determined she had been sexually assaulted. The driver's side window of the truck was partially rolled down, which led police to believe that the perpetrator may have been posing as a law enforcement officer, or actually was one. Even though this murder occurred about 25 miles from the Colonial Parkway and about 30 minutes away from where Kathy and Becky were killed, authorities immediately linked the cases. Both involved young couples killed at or around Lover's Lane areas. The locations were isolated and carefully chosen. There was no evidence of robbery. The similarities were too strong to ignore. A pattern was emerging, and it terrified the community. Less than a year later, on April 9, 1988, 2 more young people vanished. Cassandra Lee Haley, 18 years old, and Richard Keith Call, 20 years old, were both students at Christopher Newport University. They were on their first date together. Cassandra left her family's home in Grafton when Keith picked her up for the evening. They attended a party in the University Square area of Newport News. They left the party around 1:30 in the morning so Cassandra could make her curfew. They never made it home. The next day, on April 10th, Keith's red 1982 Toyota Celica was found abandoned at the York River Overlook on the Colonial Parkway. This was the same parkway where Kathy and Becky had been killed about a mile and a half away. Some articles of clothing were found inside the car. The keys were still in the ignition. Keith's gold wristwatch was left in the seat. Keith's family insisted he would never leave his watch behind. Both Cassandra's and Keith's families reported that their loved ones had a fear of the dark, isolated parkway at nighttime. They disputed that the couple would have intentionally parked there. This suggested that something had forced them to stop, or someone had moved the vehicle there after the abduction. Despite extensive searches, the bodies of Cassandra Haley and Richard Keith Call have never been found. They are presumed dead, and their case remains unsolved to this day. The final confirmed victims in the Colonial Parkway series disappeared on September 5, 1989, which was Labor Day weekend. 18-year-old Anna Maria Phelps and 21-year-old Daniel Lauer were traveling from Amelia County to Virginia Beach to meet Daniel's brother Clint. Anna Maria was dating Clint, so she was technically Daniel's brother's girlfriend. The two were traveling companions, and there were rumors about the nature of their relationship, but this was never confirmed. They were driving in Daniel's gold 1972 Chevrolet Nova. When they didn't arrive in Virginia Beach, they were reported missing. Daniel's car was found abandoned at the Interstate 64 New Kent rest stop. The car was found on the westbound side of the highway, which was the opposite direction from their destination. This confused police and suggested the car had been moved, or the couple had been forced to turn around. Anna Maria's purse was found inside the car. There were 2 pairs of underwear and shoes, along with Daniel's wallet, which ruled out robbery as a motive. A feathered roach clip that Daniel kept attached to the rear-view mirror had been transferred to the driver's side mirror, suggesting someone else had been in the vehicle. For more than a month, Anna Maria and Daniel's whereabouts were unknown. On October 19, 1989, hunters discovered 2 bodies on a logging road in a wooded area between Williamsburg and Richmond along Interstate 64. The location was about a quarter of a mile from Courthouse Road and about a mile from the rest stop where Daniel's car had been found. The bodies were badly decomposed and found under a blanket. They were identified as Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer. Due to the advanced decomposition, determining an exact cause of death was difficult. However, Anna Maria appeared to have nick marks from a knife on her hand bones, suggesting she may have been stabbed or tried to defend herself. Daniel had been carrying between $600 and $800 from painting jobs he had worked that summer, so robbery may have been a motive in this case, though his wallet was still in the car. By 1989, the Colonial Parkway murders had become a major case that involved multiple law enforcement agencies. The FBI, Virginia State Police, and local police departments formed joint task forces. They chased leads across state lines. They interviewed hundreds of people. They developed multiple theories about who the killer or killers might be. But the case was incredibly frustrating. The crime scenes were clean. There was minimal physical evidence. The killer seemed to know how to avoid leaving traces. The staged nature of the scene suggested someone with knowledge of police work or someone who had carefully studied how to commit these crimes without getting caught. One of the most prominent theories was that the killer was a law enforcement officer or someone impersonating police. Criminal profiler Pat Brown suggested this theory because many of the cars in the cases were found with either the driver's side door open or the driver's side window lowered. This would make sense if someone in a uniform or with a badge had approached the vehicles and the victims had complied, thinking they were being stopped by legitimate authority. It would explain how the killer gained control over 2 people at once without signs of a major struggle in most cases. It would also explain why the crime scenes were so clean and why the killer seemed to understand how investigations work. Larry McCann, the head of the Virginia State Police's Behavioral Science Unit, argued that 2 individuals were working together in the murders. He felt the level of control demonstrated over the victims suggested 2 perpetrators. This theory was supported by Irvin Wells of the FBI, who also suspected a pair of offenders. Controlling 2 people, especially when one or both might try to run or fight back, would be much easier with 2 attackers. It would also explain how vehicles were moved and crime scenes were staged so efficiently. Several suspects emerged over the years. In 1988, a private detective named Ronald Little, who was under arrest on immigration charges, alleged he was a suspect in the Parkway murders. Little owned a security company called Liberty Security, later called Advance Security. Interestingly, Robin Edwards' mother, Bonnie, had been employed by the company. Brian Pettinger, who went missing in December 1987 after training at a dance studio and whose vehicle was found in a nearby mall parking lot, had worked as a security guard and loss prevention officer for the firm. Another employee of the company, Lori Ann Powell Compton, had gone missing on March 8, 1988. The connections seemed suspicious, but the FBI denied that Little was a suspect in the murders. Little was deported back to his native New Zealand in 1989 and has since died. Another suspect who drew attention was Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., nicknamed Pokey. Wilmer was a waterman who worked as a fisherman on his own boat called the Denny Wade, primarily harvesting clams and oysters. He also ran a business called Better Tree Service. He was known to be an avid hunter and belonged to a hunt club in the Middle Peninsula region. Wilmer had a distinct blue 1966 Dodge Fargo pickup truck with the license plate EMRAW. Investigators surveilled Wilmer at his Lancaster County home and even obtained a warrant to search his trailer. During the search, the FBI found handcuffs and a gun. However, an FBI polygraph examiner cleared Wilmer, and he was subsequently freed. Police moved on to other leads, and for decades, Wilmer was not seriously considered as the main suspect. In May 1988, the FBI offered a $10,000 reward for information. By June 1988, the media was referring to the case as the Colonial Parkway Murders, a name that stuck. The case went cold for years. Families formed an organization called FFACT, which stands for Family and Friends Against Crime, today, to keep the investigations alive. But as the years went on, they received fewer and fewer responses from police. The immediate aftermath of these murders was devastating for the families and the community. 8 young people, most of them barely adults, were gone. 2 of them, Cassandra Haley and Richard Keith Call, were never found, leaving their families without even the closure of a burial. The fear in the region was real. Young couples were afraid to park in secluded areas. Parents warned their children to stay away from the Colonial Parkway at night. The sense of safety that had once defined this historic, peaceful area was shattered. The investigation consumed enormous resources. Multiple agencies worked on the case. Hundreds of interviews were conducted. Thousands of hours were spent chasing leads. But the lack of physical evidence and the clean crime scenes made progress nearly impossible. The killer or killers had been careful, and that level of care suggested experience or knowledge that kept them one step ahead of law enforcement. In 2009, a scandal rocked the case. It was discovered that nearly 80 highly graphic crime scene photographs of the Colonial Parkway murders victims had been leaked to the public. These photos, which were never meant to be seen outside of law enforcement, were used to teach a class by a retired and now deceased former FBI photographer. The leak was a violation of the victims' dignity and their families' privacy. It added insult to injury. Around the same time, families and media reported significant evidence handling problems. According to investigative reporting and author accounts, evidence had been mishandled or lost over the years, adding to the family's frustration with how the investigation had been conducted. The FBI, seemingly embarrassed by these revelations, met with the families and assured them that the Bureau was still working on the case, but trust had been damaged. The families felt betrayed by the very agencies that were supposed to bring them justice. In 2010, there was renewed hope when former Milwaukee homicide detective Steve Spingola, who had a reputation for solving even the toughest mysteries, was hired by the victims' families to launch a new private investigation. Spingola spent years reviewing evidence and conducting interviews. His investigation resulted in several searches of the Colonial Parkway conducted by independent teams. Ultimately, Spingola came to a controversial conclusion. He believed that the murders were not all committed by the same person or people. He specifically thought that the first murder, the killing of Kathy Thomas and Becky Dowski, was not related to the other Colonial Parkway murders at all. Instead, he believed their deaths were connected to another double murder that occurred in Shenandoah National Park in 1996, 180 miles west of the Colonial Parkway. In that 1996 case, 2 women named Laura Winans and Julianne Williams, who were also in a romantic relationship, were found with their throats slashed in their tent at the Shenandoah National Park. The similarities to the Thomas Dowski murder were striking. Both involved lesbian couples. Both involved strangulation and throat slashing. Both occurred on national park property, connected by Interstate 64. The FBI investigated this potential connection extensively. In 2001, the Department of Justice indicted a man named Darrell David Rice for the Williams and Winans murders, but charges were dropped after DNA found at the scene matched neither Rice nor the victims. In June 2024, the FBI announced new DNA evidence linking the Shenandoah killings to serial rapist Walter Leo Jackson, with a 2.6 trillion to 1 match between DNA from the scene and Jackson's profile. Just 15 days after Rice was exonerated, he was killed in a car accident while riding his bicycle on a highway in Missouri. His death at age 56, coming so soon after his name was finally cleared, was a tragic end to decades of false accusations. The DNA breakthrough potentially supported Spingola's theory that the first Colonial Parkway murder was separate from the others. However, not everyone agreed with Spingola's assessment. Other investigators believed all 4 cases were connected and were the work of one killer or one team of killers. The debate continues to this day. Also in 2010, another potential clue emerged in the Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer case. A note was discovered in a box that had been taken years earlier from Anna Maria's apartment. The note, which was undated and purportedly written by Anna Maria, indicated that she was supposed to meet someone in a blue van at a rest stop. Private detective Steve Spingola published details about this note in his magazine. Virginia State Police claimed the information in the note had been previously examined, though one state police investigator working the case told a television reporter that he was unaware of the note's existence. Whether this note was a genuine lead or a dead end remains unclear, but it added another layer of mystery to an already complex case. Then, in January 2024, there was a major breakthrough. Virginia State Police announced that DNA evidence had positively linked Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. to 3 cold case homicides from the 1980s. This was the same Wilmer who had been cleared by the FBI decades earlier after passing a polygraph test. The announcement stunned everyone who had followed the case. Wilmer was identified as the person responsible for the murders of David Knobling and Robin Edwards at Ragged Island in 1987. He was also linked by DNA to the killing of Teresa Lynn Howell, a 29-year-old woman who was murdered in Hampton, Virginia in July 1989. Teresa's case had not originally been considered part of the Colonial Parkway murders, but the DNA connection revealed she was another victim of the same killer. Teresa had been seen leaving a popular Hampton night spot called the Zodiac Club around 2:30 in the morning on July 1, 1989. 7 hours later, her body was found by a construction worker in a nearby wooded area on Butler Farm Road. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled. The murder was not connected to the Colonial Parkway killings until 2022, when DNA from Teresa's case was matched to DNA from the Knobling Edwards slaying. The DNA was later identified as belonging to Wilmer. The identification of Wilmer came about in an unusual way. Wilmer had died alone in his home in Lancaster County, Virginia, on December 15, 2017, at the age of 63. His body was not discovered for a month. Because he had never been convicted of a felony, his DNA was never in the CODIS database, which is the FBI's national DNA database of convicted offenders. For years, investigators had DNA evidence from the crime scenes, but they had no match. They knew there was a common suspect linking the Knobling Edwards and Howell cases, but they didn't know who it was. When Wilmer's decomposed body was found in 2018, DNA testing was needed to positively identify him. That DNA sample was entered into a different system, and investigators were eventually able to connect it to the evidence from the murders. Authorities said they had been going back over cold case evidence, re-examining witness statements, and using new forensic technology. The Virginia Department of Forensic Science identified Wilmer as a genetic match to evidence found on the victims. The match was so conclusive that prosecutors for Isle of Wight County and the city of Hampton said that if Wilmer were alive, charges would be filed against him in connection with the 3 deaths. Corinne Geller, a Virginia State Police spokeswoman, explained that part of the cold case philosophy is to go back and start re-looking at everything, going through all the witness statements and all the evidence. She described it as a very time-consuming and very complex process, but a very effective way to solve old cases. The families of David Knobling and Robin Edwards released a joint statement after the announcement. They said that for 36 years, their families had lived in a vacuum of the unknown. They had lived with the fear of worrying that a person capable of deliberately killing Robin and David could attack and claim another victim. Now they had a sense of relief and justice, knowing that he could no longer victimize another. However, they also expressed frustration that Wilmer's death would not allow them to seek out the answers to countless questions that had haunted them for so long. Teresa Howell's family also released a statement expressing gratitude to all investigators involved. They said the dedication, relentless efforts, and evolving technology had brought them closure that they had sought over the last 34 years. But they also noted that while they were grateful for the closure, nothing would bring Teresa back. The void left by her absence over the years was inexpressible. The identification of Wilmer as the killer in some of the cases raised new questions about the other Colonial Parkway murders. Virginia State Police emphasized that although similarities in the series of double homicides that spanned a 3-year period cannot be ignored, at that time, there was no forensic or physical evidence to link the Isle of Wight County homicides to the other double murders. The murders of Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski, and the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley, remain unsolved. Brian Dugan, the special agent in charge of the FBI's Norfolk Field Office, said investigators would continue to look into whether Wilmer was connected to the other Colonial Parkway murders. He appealed to the public for more information, saying that even though Wilmer was deceased, it was not too late for people to come forward with information. The cases currently linked to Wilmer are considered resolved but not closed. This is an important distinction that technically keeps the cases open, as authorities work to tie up any loose ends and investigate whether Wilmer had any accomplices or whether he was connected to other crimes. Investigators are working to create a timeline and reconstruct the movements and encounters of Wilmer during the time period when the murders occurred. They want to know if he acted alone or if others were involved. They also want to know if there are other victims. According to information that has emerged, Wilmer was known to confront couples. He had a significant presence on the parkway. He owned boats and tools that would have allowed him to move around unnoticed, especially in waterfront areas where some of the crimes occurred. His work as a waterman gave him familiarity with the geography of the region and access to remote locations. His background as a hunter meant he was comfortable in wooded, isolated areas. All of these factors made him a viable suspect, yet he had slipped through the investigation decades earlier because he passed a polygraph test. The revelation that Wilmer was the killer in at least some of the cases has not brought complete closure to the families or to the community. The other cases remain unsolved. The possibility that there were multiple killers or that Wilmer had accomplices means the full story may never be known. Some investigators still believe that 2 people were working together based on the level of control demonstrated over the victims and the way the crime scenes were staged. Others think that different killers were responsible for different cases, and that the Colonial Parkway murders were not the work of a single serial killer, but rather a tragic coincidence of multiple violent crimes happening in the same area during the same time period. The Colonial Parkway murders have been the subject of numerous documentaries, books, podcasts, and true crime investigations. In May 2018, the murders were covered in a featured panel discussion at the annual CrimeCon True Crime Convention in Nashville. The panel was moderated by former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell and featured family members and advocates, including Joyce Call, Keith Call's mother, and Bill Thomas, Kathy Thomas's brother. Authors who have written extensively about the case, including Blaine Pardo and his daughter Victoria Hester, have produced comprehensive accounts of the crimes, the investigations, and the theories surrounding the killings. A year after the announcement about Wilmer, family members have expressed concern about the pace of progress. Bill Thomas, Kathy Thomas's brother, told reporters in January 2025 that there have been promises made about next steps by Virginia State Police and the FBI, but the families haven't seen much in terms of results. The families continue to push for answers and refuse to give up hope that the remaining cases will be solved. The Colonial Parkway murders remain one of Virginia's most notorious cold cases. The scenic road that was once a peaceful lover's lane is now forever associated with tragedy and unanswered questions. The parkway remains a destination for tourists, cyclists, and families who value its beauty and historic landmarks. But for locals and for the families of the victims, memories of the unsolved murders linger beneath the parkway's peaceful surface. The pain and uncertainty left in the wake of these tragedies still shape how the community thinks and feels about the parkway. The case serves as a haunting reminder of how difficult it can be to solve serial crimes, especially when they occurred decades ago before modern DNA technology was available. It also highlights the importance of preserving evidence and maintaining thorough investigations over long periods of time. The breakthrough identification of Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. came about only because investigators never gave up, because they continued to re-examine evidence, and because advances in forensic science made it possible to extract and analyze DNA that was previously untestable. But the story is incomplete. Two young people, Keith Call and Cassandra Haley, are still missing. Their families have never had the closure of recovering their bodies or knowing exactly what happened to them. The murders of Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski remain unsolved, with no DNA evidence linking them to Wilmer or any other suspect. The families of all the victims continue to wait for answers, to hope for justice, and to remember their loved ones who were taken far too soon on a dark stretch of Virginia highway that was supposed to be a place of beauty and history, not death and mystery. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have the Shenandoah National Park murders, 1996, Virginia, USA. The Shenandoah National Park murders, 1996, Virginia, USA. The Shenandoah National Park murders are a tragic case that haunted investigators for nearly 3 decades. In May 1996, 2 young women went on what should have been a peaceful hiking trip in the beautiful mountains of Virginia. Instead, they became victims of a brutal crime that would shock the nation and leave their families searching for answers for 28 years. Julianne Williams and Laura Winans were experienced outdoor guides who loved nature and adventure. They were in a romantic relationship and had planned this trip as a celebration before Julie started a new job. What happened to them in those woods would not only devastate their loved ones but also send waves of fear through communities across the country, especially among women and those in the LGBTQ+ community. The case remained cold for decades, with false leads and wrongful accusations compounding the tragedy. But in June 2024, advances in DNA technology finally revealed the truth about who killed these 2 women. Julianne Marie Williams, who went by Julie, was 24 years old in 1996. She was from St. Cloud, Minnesota, and she was the kind of person who made an impact on everyone she met. Julie loved sports and geology. She was passionate about helping her community and had a brilliant mind. In high school, she won the Minnesota State Doubles Tennis Championship. She traveled to Europe during college to study the extinction of dinosaurs. She graduated summa cum laude, which means with the highest honors, and she spoke fluent Spanish. Julie worked at a bookstore in Burlington, Vermont, and had just accepted a new job at Lake Champlain in Vermont as a geologist. She was supposed to start this new job on June 1st, 1996. Sadly, she never got the chance. Laura Salisbury Winans, known as Lolly, was 26 years old. She was born into a wealthy family in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, but she rejected the privilege of her birth. Friends described her personality as down-to-earth and genuine. According to journalist Barry Yeoman, Lolly was a microbrew drinking, fish following, cigarette smoking, good time girl. She had a free spirit and an adventurous nature. After graduating high school, Lolly dropped out of college. In 1994, she moved to Maine and attended Unity College. She also worked as a wilderness guide, which was her true calling. She loved being outdoors and helping others experience the beauty of nature. Julie and Lolly met nearly 2 years before their deaths at Woods Women, a non-profit organization in Minnesota that focused on education and adventure travel for women. The organization no longer exists, but at the time, it provided outdoor experiences and wilderness training, specifically for women. It was in the isolated lakes of the Boundary Waters and the towering pine forests of northern Minnesota that Julie and Lolly connected. They were 2 people from very different backgrounds who found common ground in their love of the outdoors. They fell in love and began building a life together. Both women were skilled outdoor guides with dozens of wilderness trips to their names. They were experienced hikers who knew how to stay safe in the backcountry. They were not reckless or unprepared. This makes what happened to them even more horrifying. On Sunday, May 19, 1996, Julie and Lolly set out for Shenandoah National Park in Virginia with Lolly's golden retriever, a dog named Taj. They packed their heavy backpacks with camping gear and supplies. They planned to spend about a week hiking through the park and taking in the stunning views from the trails that branch out from Skyline Drive, the famous scenic road that runs through Shenandoah. The timing of the trip was significant. Julie was about to start her new job as a geologist, and this was meant to be a final adventure before she began this new chapter of her life. The women were excited and looking forward to spending time together in nature. Shenandoah National Park is a beautiful and historic location. The park was founded on December 26, 1935, and stretches over 100 miles along the Blue Ridge Mountains. It sits between the Shenandoah Valley in the west and the Piedmont region in the east. The park is located about 75 miles from Washington, D.C., and covers an area of nearly 200,000 acres. It includes mountain streams, more than 500 miles of hiking trails, and nearly 80,000 acres of designated wilderness. One of the park's most famous features is Skyline Drive, which was constructed in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps. This scenic road has 105 miles of overlooks, trailheads, picnic areas, and campgrounds between Front Royal in the north and Rockfish Gap in the south. The park is a popular destination that attracts over 1.5 million visitors each year. It's considered a safe and peaceful place where people go to escape the stress of daily life and reconnect with nature. After arriving at the park, Julie and Lolly hiked to find the perfect campsite. They eventually chose a spot off the Bridle Trail, which is part of the horse trail system that runs from Big Meadows to Skyland. Their campsite was tucked away in a peaceful spot next to a mountain stream called the Northern Fork of the White Oak. The sound of flowing water would have been soothing and relaxing. Investigators later noted that this babbling stream may have actually worked against the women because it could have drowned out the sound of approaching footsteps. The campsite was only about a quarter mile from Skyline Drive and about half a mile from Skyland Lodge, a popular gathering place with a bar, restaurant, and cabins. Because they were camping in the backcountry, their site was not marked with any signs or amenities like fire rings or picnic tables. It was just a quiet patch of ground surrounded by trees, with the gentle sound of the river nearby. It seemed like the perfect place to relax and enjoy nature. During their time in the park, Julie and Lolly went on several hikes. They took photos along the White Oak Canyon Trail. A camera found at their campsite showed pictures of their adventures. A few days after entering the park, they climbed Hawksbill Mountain, which is the highest peak in Shenandoah. The photos from the trip show two women who were relaxed, happy, and enjoying their time together. They were smiling and basking in the sunlight with sweeping mountain views behind them. These images are heartbreaking to look at now, knowing what was about to happen. Julie and Lolly were last seen alive on May 24, 1996. What happened next remains unclear, but at some point that day or evening, someone attacked them at their campsite. The attack was brutal and calculated. On May 31, 1996, Julie's father, Thomas Williams, reported his daughter missing when she failed to return to her apartment in Richmond, Vermont, as planned. This sparked an immediate and intensive search by park rangers. The National Park Service organized hasty searches to cover all the trail corridors in the area where the women were believed to be camping. During the search, rangers located Julie and Lolly's car parked just north of Skyland Lodge. This gave them a starting point for where to focus their efforts. At some point during the search, rangers found Taj, the golden retriever, wandering through the park without a leash near the White Oak Canyon Trail. The dog appeared to be unharmed but was alone. Finding the dog without the women was an ominous sign that something was very wrong. On the evening of June 1, 1996, park rangers made a horrific discovery. They found a blue and yellow tent hemmed in by foliage along the Bridle Trail. As they approached and called out Julie and Lolly's names, there was no response. Inside and near that tent, they found the bodies of both women. The crime scene was disturbing and showed that this was not a random attack. This was a planned and brutal murder. Lolly Winans was found inside the tent. Her hands had been bound with duct tape and her mouth had been gagged. Her throat had been slashed. Her ankles were also bound, restricting her movement. Julie Williams was found in her sleeping bag about 30 to 40 feet away from the tent, down a small embankment. Like Lolly, Julie had been gagged and bound. Her hands were tied with duct tape, and investigators noted something particularly disturbing. The duct tape used to bind Lolly's hands had first been used to tape Julie's mouth shut. This suggested a level of planning and control by the killer. Julie's throat had also been slashed. Both women were partially undressed. The location of the bodies suggested that Julie may have been moved or dragged from the tent area down to where she was found. The fact that the women were found in different locations, one inside the tent and one outside, indicated that the attack may have unfolded over time, or that the killer had moved them after the murders. The crime scene showed a level of sophistication and planning that was chilling. Everything about how the scene was set up suggested that this was not an impulsive act. The killer had come prepared with duct tape and weapons. The killer had taken control of two strong, capable women who knew how to handle themselves in the wilderness. The Park Service waited 36 hours after discovering the bodies before announcing the murders to the public, even though the park was full of visitors over the Memorial Day weekend who may have been at risk. When the announcement was finally made, Acting Park Superintendent Greg Stiles called it an isolated incident without providing any basis for such a statement. The FBI announced shortly afterward that the murders appeared to be random. This claim would be questioned for years to come. The initial law enforcement, media, and community response to these murders was enormous. The case made national headlines. Investigators began interviewing people all across the country, generating hundreds of leads. Because Shenandoah National Park is an exclusive federal jurisdiction, meaning only the federal government has law enforcement authority there, the FBI took over the investigation. This would become both a help and a hindrance as the case progressed. One of the most painful aspects of this case for the families was how Julie and Lolly's relationship became public. The women were publicly outed as lesbians on the day of their funerals. The nature of their sexuality and their romantic relationship instantly became national news. Family members found this incredibly difficult, not because they had any problem with their sexual orientation, but because they didn't get the chance to process this information privately. It was taken out of their hands and splashed across newspapers and television screens. The murders sparked conversations about safety in the wilderness and about homophobic hate crimes. Many people wondered if Julie and Lolly had been targeted specifically because they were a lesbian couple. The FBI and National Park Service launched a massive investigation. The challenge of investigating a wilderness murder is that crime scenes in nature are vastly different from urban crime scenes. There are no surveillance cameras, no nearby witnesses, and evidence can be scattered over a large area or contaminated by weather and wildlife. Many law enforcement officers are trained to investigate urban crimes, where the first thing they do is secure the premises and the surrounding area. But in the wilderness, securing a crime scene is much more difficult. The crime scene itself was somewhat compromised by the initial response. Rangers and media had walked through the area before it could be fully secured. Footprints and tire prints were corrupted or destroyed. Despite these challenges, investigators did collect DNA evidence and other forensic materials from the scene. For years, the case remained cold. Then, in July 1997, about a year after the murders, a man named Daryl David Rice was arrested for attempting to abduct a female bicyclist in Shenandoah National Park. The incident happened on Skyline Drive. Rice, who was from Columbia, Maryland, ran the woman off the road while she was on her bike. He then tried to drag her into his truck. When he was unsuccessful, he tried to run her over with his vehicle. Fortunately, the woman was able to escape and call for help. Rice was caught and arrested. He pleaded guilty to attempted kidnapping and received an 11-year prison sentence. Because this attack happened in the same park where Julie and Lolly had been killed just a year earlier, Rice immediately became a suspect in their murders. The similarities were impossible to ignore. He was attacking a woman in the same location. He had shown himself capable of extreme violence. Investigators began building a case against him. In April 2002, nearly 6 years after Julie and Lolly's deaths, United States Attorney General John Ashcroft announced a federal grand jury indictment charging Daryl David Rice with capital murder in the deaths of the two women. Rice was charged with 4 counts of capital murder, 2 of which alleged that he had selected his victims because of their sexual orientation. Because Rice was charged with a hate crime, His indictment invoked a federal sentencing enhancement, and he was eligible for the death penalty. At a news conference announcing Rice's indictment, prosecutors made serious allegations. They claimed that Rice had stated on several occasions that he enjoys assaulting women because they are, in his words, more vulnerable than men. Prosecutors also stated that Rice had said the women deserved to die because they were gay. They alleged that Rice had poor relationships with female co-workers and often verbally harassed them. They said he had committed numerous physical and verbal assaults against randomly selected women. Rice was also reportedly seen on videotape entering the park on May 25 and 26, 1996, though he denied being in the park at those times. The case against Rice seemed strong based on circumstantial evidence and his history of violence against women. But there was a major problem. The forensic evidence did not support the theory that Rice was the killer. Prosecutors had DNA evidence from the crime scene, including hair samples that had been collected. When these samples were tested, they did not match Darrell Rice. In fact, the DNA evidence conclusively ruled him out as a possible suspect. This created a huge dilemma for the prosecution. They had built an entire case around Rice being the murderer, and they had publicly announced this to the families and to the media. But the science did not support their theory. In February 2004, just before Rice's trial was scheduled to begin, prosecutors moved to continue the case because their forensic experts had concluded that DNA from the crime scene belonged to an unidentified man who was not Darrell Rice. The government then dismissed the charges against Rice. This was devastating for multiple reasons. The families of Julie and Lolly had been told they finally had answers. They had been preparing for a trial where they would see justice served. Now they were back to square one. Rice himself had spent years in prison, facing the possibility of the death penalty for a crime he did not commit. His reputation was destroyed. The media and the public had been told he was a killer. Even after the charges were dropped, many people still associated him with the murders. Darrell Rice's life was forever changed by these false accusations. He was unable to find employment because of the media coverage linking him to the murders. He was forced to live off the grid, moving from place to place, trying to survive while being haunted by accusations he could not escape. His attorneys and advocates at the University of Virginia School of Law Innocence Project worked for years to clear his name and to push for additional DNA testing that they believed would definitively prove his innocence. In June 2024, their efforts finally paid off when new DNA evidence identified the real killer. Just 15 days after being exonerated, Darrell Rice was killed in a tragic accident while riding his bicycle on a highway in Missouri. He died at age 56, never having had the chance to fully reclaim his life. After Rice was cleared, the investigation continued, but progress was slow. In the years following, various suspects were considered. One was Richard Mark Evanitz, a known serial killer who had abducted and murdered 3 young girls in Spotsylvania County, Virginia. In 2002, Evanitz kidnapped another young woman, but she managed to escape. This led to a high-speed police chase across multiple states. At the end of the chase, Evanitz took his own life. Some investigators and journalists believed Evanitz could have been responsible for Julie and Lolly's murders, but there was no forensic evidence linking him to the crime. The case remained cold for many more years. The families of Julie Williams and Lolly Winans lived with unanswered questions and unresolved grief. They formed support networks and worked to keep the case in the public eye, hoping that someone, somewhere, would come forward with information. Journalists and authors wrote about the case, trying to generate new leads. In 2021, journalist Catherine Miles published a book called Trailed: One Woman's Quest to Solve the Shenandoah Murders. Miles spent years investigating the case, interviewing law enforcement officials, forensic experts, and the families of the victims. Her book shed new light on the investigation and raised important questions about how the case had been handled. Also, in 2021, a new FBI Richmond investigative team was assigned to conduct a methodical review of the case. FBI special agents, intelligence analysts, and other FBI Richmond employees reassessed hundreds of leads and interviews. They spent countless hours identifying and prioritizing evidence from the crime scene that could be retested using modern forensic technology. DNA science had advanced significantly since 1996. Techniques that did not exist when the murders occurred were now available. The team submitted several items of evidence to an accredited private laboratory for testing. Recently, the private lab successfully pulled DNA from several pieces of evidence. With assistance from the Virginia State Police, the DNA profile was submitted to the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, known as CODIS. This is a national database that contains DNA profiles of known offenders. The submission generated a positive match to a man named Walter Leo Jackson Sr. Jackson, who went by the name Leo, was a convicted serial rapist originally from the Cleveland, Ohio area. He had a lengthy criminal history that included kidnapping, rapes, and assaults. To confirm the match, investigators took additional steps. They compared the DNA evidence from Julie and Lolly's murders directly to a buccal swab containing Jackson's DNA. A buccal swab is a sample taken from inside a person's cheek using a cotton swab. The Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office in Ohio still had Jackson's DNA on file from his previous criminal cases. When the comparison was made, the results were conclusive. Stanley Metter, the FBI Richmond special agent in charge, said the match confirmed a certainty that is rarely seen. There was a 1 in 2.6 trillion chance that the DNA came from someone other than Walter Leo Jackson. United States Attorney Christopher Kavanaugh said he had prosecuted many homicides and cold cases, but had never witnessed statistics that high. This was as close to absolute certainty as forensic science can provide. On June 20, 2024, nearly 28 years after Julie and Lolly were killed, federal authorities held a press conference to announce that they had identified Walter Leo Jackson Sr. as the person responsible for the murders. Kavanaugh told the media and the families that after 28 years, they were finally able to say who committed the brutal murders of Lolly Winans and Julie Williams in Shenandoah National Park. He extended his condolences to the families and expressed hope that the announcement would provide some small measure of solace. Walter Leo Jackson Sr. was born on November 2, 1947. He worked as a residential painter by trade. He was also an avid hiker and was known to visit Shenandoah National Park. At the time of Julie and Lolly's murders, investigators believe Jackson was driving a 1984 chestnut brown AMC Eagle 30. He later drove a 1979 Ford Econoline 250 van. Jackson was known to use temporary tags, alter license plates, and frequently change vehicles. This made him difficult to track and identify over the years. Jackson had an extensive criminal history. He had been in and out of prison for decades. The FBI provided a timeline of when Jackson was incarcerated, which helped rule him in or out of other crimes. He was in prison from January 1984 through February 1989 on charges in Geauga County, Ohio. He was imprisoned again from May 1994 through September 1994 on charges in Cuyahoga County. He was incarcerated from August 2000 through May 2007, also in Cuyahoga County. His final prison sentence began in May 2012 and lasted until his death in March 2018 in Cuyahoga County. Jackson died in prison at the age of 70, never facing charges for the Shenandoah murders. What makes Jackson's criminal history particularly disturbing is the timeline around Julie and Lolly's murders. Jackson was free and not incarcerated in May 1996 when the women were killed. Just days after murdering Julie and Lolly on May 24th, Jackson committed more crimes. On June 5, 1996, just 12 days after the Shenandoah murders, Jackson kidnapped and raped a woman at knife point in the Cleveland, Ohio area. 1 month later, in July 1996, he kidnapped and raped another woman, also at knife point. He was arrested for these crimes and served time in prison. While in prison, he was forensically linked through DNA to these 1996 rapes. This established his DNA profile in the system, which would eventually lead to solving Julie and Lolly's murders decades later. In 2011, Jackson committed another horrific crime. He picked up an 18-year-old woman in Cleveland in his 1979 Ford Econoline van. He abducted her and raped her. The young woman managed to escape while still bound, gagged, and naked. She got help and Jackson was arrested. He pleaded guilty to several charges in that case. This was his final conviction, and he was serving this sentence when he died in prison in March 2018. Based on the DNA evidence and Jackson's criminal history, investigators were able to make additional conclusions about what happened to Julie and Lolly. They confirmed that both women were sexually assaulted before they were killed. At the press conference announcing Jackson as the suspect, authorities made it clear that while the crime was brutal and definitionally hateful, they did not have evidence that Julie and Lolly were selected specifically because they were lesbians or that Jackson had any knowledge of their sexual orientation. The evidence suggested that Jackson was a predator who targeted women, not that he was specifically targeting lesbian couples. This was important for the families to know because it meant the women had not been singled out for who they were. They were victims of a violent criminal who happened upon them in the wrong place at the wrong time. The FBI announced that they would continue working with law enforcement partners to determine if Jackson is responsible for other unsolved crimes. His pattern of behavior, his familiarity with Shenandoah National Park, and his decades of violent crimes against women suggest there may be other victims. Investigators asked anyone with information about Jackson to contact the FBI. They wanted to know about his activities, his travels, and any interactions people may have had with him over the years. The announcement brought some closure to the families, but it also brought complex emotions. Joyce Call, who lost her brother, Keith Call, in the Colonial Parkway murders that we discussed earlier, attended a podcast about the Shenandoah case. She understood the pain of waiting decades for answers. Bill Thomas, whose sister Kathy Thomas was killed in the Colonial Parkway murders, also expressed relief that the Winans and Williams families finally had answers. But for those families, the relief was mixed with grief and frustration. They had waited 28 years. They had watched an innocent man be accused and have his life destroyed. They had endured false hope and dead ends, and now they learned that the killer had died 6 years earlier without ever facing justice. There would be no trial, no chance to hear why he did what he did, no opportunity to confront him in court. The Shenandoah National Park murders changed how many people view wilderness safety. The case had a profound impact on women and LGBTQ+ communities who saw the outdoors as a refuge. Many people who heard about Julie and Lolly's murders stopped going into the backcountry. The fear that took hold was deep and lasting. Author Catherine Miles wrote about how more than a few people told her that the murder of Julie and Lolly ended their time in the backcountry, that even though they had never known the two women personally, news of what happened to them was scary enough to keep them away. This fear robbed countless people of the joy and peace that nature can provide. The case also highlighted the challenges of investigating crimes in national parks. The National Park Service is chronically underfunded and understaffed. Rangers are asked to do many jobs, from education and conservation to law enforcement. They do not always have the resources, training, or support needed to handle major crimes. The investigation into Julie and Lolly's murders involved cooperation between the National Park Service, the FBI, Virginia State Police, and local law enforcement. While this collaboration was necessary, it also created complications. Different agencies have different procedures, different priorities, and sometimes conflicting approaches. Communication between agencies was not always smooth, and this may have slowed the investigation. The resolution of this case demonstrates the importance of preserving evidence and continuing to work cold cases even when decades have passed. The DNA evidence that solved this crime was collected in 1996, but the technology to properly analyze and match it did not exist until many years later. If that evidence had been destroyed or lost, Julie and Lolly's families would never have gotten answers. The case also shows the value of genetic databases and the importance of collecting DNA from convicted criminals. Jackson's DNA was in the system because of his previous convictions. Without that database entry, investigators would never have made the connection. Julie Williams and Lolly Winans were two young women with bright futures ahead of them. They loved the outdoors, they loved each other, and they were skilled and careful in the wilderness. What happened to them was not their fault. They did nothing wrong. They were victims of a violent predator who should have been stopped long before he encountered them. Their murders serve as a reminder that evil can exist anywhere, even in the most beautiful and peaceful places. But their story also shows that justice, though sometimes slow, can prevail. After 28 years, their families finally know the truth. Walter Leo Jackson Sr. was responsible for taking these 2 lives. That knowledge cannot bring Julie and Lolly back, but it can provide some measure of peace and closure for those who loved them. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the Great Lovers Lane Murders, Texarkana Moonlight Murders, 1946, Texas, Arkansas, USA. The Great Lovers Lane Murders, Texarkana Moonlight Murders, 1946, Texas, Arkansas, USA. In the spring of 1946, America was celebrating. World War II had ended just months earlier. Young men were returning home from overseas. Families were reuniting. People felt safe again. The Twin Cities of Texarkana sat right on the border between Texas and Arkansas. About 50,000 people lived there. It was a normal American town. People left their doors unlocked. Kids played outside until dark. Couples went to the movies and parked on quiet roads afterward. Nobody worried much about crime. But that spring, something changed. Something evil came to Texarkana. Over 10 weeks, an unknown killer attacked 8 people. 5 of them died. The attacks were brutal and terrifying. They happened at night, always on weekends. The killer targeted couples in isolated places. Most attacks happened on quiet back roads, known as lovers' lanes. One attack happened inside a farmhouse. The killer wore a mask. He carried a gun. He moved like a ghost. Police called him the Phantom Killer. The newspapers called the crimes the Moonlight Murders. But despite hundreds of suspects, thousands of hours of investigation, and involvement from local police, state police, Texas Rangers, and the FBI, the killer was never caught. To this day, nobody knows for certain who murdered those 5 people in Texarkana. The fear started slowly. At first, people thought the violence was random, maybe a robbery gone wrong, maybe just bad luck. But as the weeks went on and more attacks happened, the pattern became clear. Someone was hunting couples. Someone was targeting young people who thought they were safe. The attacks happened every 3 to 4 weeks. They always occurred late at night on Fridays or Saturdays. The killer seemed to know the area well. He knew where couples went to be alone. He knew how to disappear without leaving much evidence behind. On Friday night, February 22nd, 1946, Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larry became the first victims. Jimmy Hollis was 25 years old. Mary Jean Larry was 19. They had been to see a movie together that evening in downtown Texarkana. The date went well. Around 11:45 at night, they drove to a secluded road just outside the city limits. It was a spot known locally as a lover's lane. The road was dirt and rarely used. It sat about 300 feet from the nearest houses. Today, a shopping mall called Central Mall sits near that spot. Back then, it was dark and quiet. They had only been parked for about 10 minutes when they saw a flashlight beam. A man approached the car. He wore a white cloth mask over his head. The mask looked like a pillowcase with holes cut out for his eyes and mouth. He pointed a flashlight and a gun at them through the window. Mary Jean would later tell police what he said. "I don't want to kill you, fellow, so do what I say." His voice was calm but threatening. He ordered both of them out of the car. Once they were outside, he told Jimmy to remove his pants. Jimmy obeyed. He stood there in just his boxer shorts. Then the attacker raised his gun and struck Jimmy twice in the head. The blows were so hard that Mary Jean thought he had been shot, but it was not a gunshot. It was the sound of Jimmy's skull fracturing. The weapon cracked his skull in 2 places. Jimmy collapsed to the ground, unconscious. The attacker then turned to Mary Jean. He sexually assaulted her. It was a horrifying and degrading attack. Mary Jean was terrified. She thought she was going to die. But then, something happened that saved their lives. Another car appeared on the road, its headlights cut through the darkness. The attacker saw the lights and ran. He disappeared into the night as quickly as he had appeared. Mary Jean ran for help. She made it to a nearby house. The homeowner called the police. Jimmy was rushed to the hospital. Doctors treated his fractured skull. Both victims survived, but they were traumatized. The police questioned them about what happened. The couple gave conflicting descriptions and could not agree on the attacker's race. Mary Jean described him as about 6 feet tall and light-skinned. Jimmy described him as a dark-tanned man under 30 years old. The inconsistency in their descriptions would later make the investigation more difficult. At the time, police did not know what to make of the attack. It seemed like an isolated incident, a random act of violence. They had no reason to believe it would happen again, but it did. 3 weeks later, on March 24, 1946, a motorist made a terrible discovery. Around 9 in the morning, he was driving on a back road about a mile outside Texarkana. He saw a car parked by the side of the road. At first, he thought the couple inside was sleeping, but something looked wrong. He stopped and got closer. What he found was a nightmare. Richard Griffin was 29 years old. His girlfriend, Polly Ann Moore, was 17. Both were dead. Richard was found between the front seats, on his knees with his head resting on his hands. His pockets had been turned inside out. Polly Ann was lying face down in the back seat. Both had been shot in the back of the head. The killer had used a .32 caliber automatic Colt pistol. The crime scene told investigators a disturbing story. Bloodstains on the ground near the car showed that Polly Ann had been shot outside the vehicle, probably while lying on a blanket. After killing her, the attacker dragged her body back into the car. Richard had been shot while still in the vehicle. The murders were execution style, cold and deliberate. The investigation was compromised from the start. It had rained overnight. The rain washed away potential evidence. To make matters worse, local police did not secure the crime scene properly. Curious townspeople and even some police officers walked all over the area before it could be properly examined. Critical evidence may have been destroyed. Investigators did manage to recover a .32 caliber shell casing from the scene, but it was not enough to identify a suspect. The double murder shocked Texarkana. People started to worry. 2 violent attacks in 3 weeks. Was there a pattern? The police were not sure yet, but citizens started taking precautions. Some bought guns, others made sure to lock their doors at night. Then it happened again. On the evening of Saturday, April 13, 1946, Betty Jo Booker was playing her saxophone at the VFW Club on West 4th and Oak Street. Betty Jo was 15 years old. She was an A student at Texas High School. She was pretty, popular, and talented. She played the E-flat alto saxophone in a local band called the Rhythmaires. They performed every Saturday night at the VFW Club. It was not a place for kids because they served beer, but Betty Jo's parents had made special arrangements with the band leader. She was allowed to play but had to follow strict rules. The band finished their performance around 1:30 in the morning on Sunday, April 14th. Betty Jo's friend Paul Martin was there to pick her up. Paul was 16 years old. He had recently moved to Kilgore, Texas, but was visiting Texarkana. He and Betty Jo had known each other since kindergarten. They were old friends. Betty Jo had told her classmates earlier that day that she did not really want to go out with Paul. She felt obligated because he was an old friend visiting from out of town. Paul was supposed to drive her to a slumber party at a friend's house across town. Betty Jo never made it to that party. Around 6:30 on Sunday morning, a man discovered Paul Martin's body. He was lying on his left side near North Park Road. He had been shot 4 times. 1 bullet went through his nose. Another went through his left ribs from behind, suggesting he had been trying to run away. A 3rd bullet hit his right hand. The 4th bullet entered the back of his neck and exited through the front of his skull. Blood was found across the road near a fence, showing that Paul had tried to escape. Police immediately organized search parties to look for Betty Jo. Where was she? Had she escaped? Was she hiding somewhere? Volunteers from the community joined the search. Around noon, a group of men from the First Methodist Church Sunday school class found her. One of the searchers was named George Boyd. He spotted her body behind a tree about 2 miles from where Paul's body had been found. She was lying on her back, fully clothed. Her overcoat was buttoned up to her chin. Her right hand was in her pocket. It looked like the scene had been staged. Betty Jo had been shot twice. One bullet went through her chest. The other hit her in the left side of her face. Contemporary reports stated she had been sexually assaulted, though no definitive determination was made public. The killer had used the same .32 caliber automatic Colt pistol that was used to kill Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore. Paul Martin's 1946 Ford Club Coupe was found abandoned near Spring Lake Park. The keys were still in the ignition. The car was about 1.5 miles from Paul's body and more than 3 miles from Betty Jo's body. Investigators could not determine which victim had been killed first, or exactly what happened that night. The crime scene had been contaminated by the rain and by the many people who walked through the area during the search. The funerals for Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker were held on Tuesday, April 16th, at Beach Street First Baptist Church. It was a stormy, windy day. Schools let students out early so they could attend and grieve for their classmates. Friends and family filled the church. Paul's mother spoke about her son. She told the mourners that she had worried about him getting into a car wreck when he left for Texarkana. She never imagined something like this could happen. She wished she had never let him go. By this time, the people of Texarkana were terrified. This was the third attack in less than 2 months. 2 of those attacks had ended in murders. 4 people were dead. The pattern was clear. Someone was hunting couples. The killer struck every 3 to 4 weeks. He targeted young people on lovers' lanes. He was armed and extremely dangerous, and nobody had any idea who he was or when he would strike again. The case attracted national attention. Reporters from newspapers all over the country came to Texarkana. The story made headlines across America. The local newspaper, the Texarkana Daily News, gave the killer a nickname. On April 16th, a headline read, "Phantom Killer Eludes Officers as Investigation of Slayings Pressed." The name stuck. From that point on, the unknown murderer was called the Phantom Killer. Some also called him the Phantom Slayer. The Texarkana Gazette ran a similar headline on April 17th that read, "Phantom Slayer, still at large as probe continues." The editor of the Texarkana Gazette later explained how the name came about. Managing editor Calvin Sutton had a sense for drama. He asked if they could refer to the unknown murderer as the Phantom. Executive editor J.Q. Mahaffey replied, "Why not? If the SOB continues to elude capture, he certainly can be called a phantom." Law enforcement agencies scrambled to respond. Local police from both the Texas and Arkansas sides worked together. The FBI sent agents. The Texas Rangers arrived, led by the famous Captain M.T. Gonzalez. His full name was Manuel Trazazas Gonzalez. He was known by his nickname Lone Wolf because he often worked alone. He was a skilled investigator with a reputation for toughness. He set up his headquarters at the Hotel Grimm in downtown Texarkana. The hotel's name seemed fitting given the grim circumstances. Gonzalez held regular press conferences in the hotel lobby. He was confident and told reporters the case would be solved soon. He also gave advice to frightened citizens. When asked what people should do to protect themselves, he told them to check their locks, get a double-barreled shotgun, and be ready to shoot anyone who tried to break in. His advice reflected the level of fear that had gripped the community. A reward fund was established. It started at $500 and eventually grew to over $7,000. That would be worth more than $100,000 today. Tips poured in. Police investigated hundreds of leads. Most turned out to be nothing. False confessions came in as well, as often happens in high-profile cases. Police questioned over 400 suspects. None of them panned out. The Phantom remained at large. The killer struck one more time. On Friday evening, May 3, 1946, Virgil Starks was at home on his farm. The farm was about 10 miles northeast of Texarkana in Miller County, Arkansas. Virgil was 37 years old. He worked as a farmer and occasionally did welding work for neighbors. He and his wife Katie had no children, but they lived a comfortable life. The farmhouse sat on a 500-acre farm. Katie's sister lived right across the highway. Virgil's brother and father both lived within 2 miles. Around 9 o'clock that evening, Virgil was relaxing after a long day. He sat in his favorite chair in the living room. He was reading the May 3rd edition of the Texarkana Gazette and listening to his favorite radio show. Katie was in the bedroom getting ready for bed. It seemed like a normal, peaceful evening. Then, 2 gunshots shattered the front window. The killer had been standing outside, about 3 feet from the window. He fired twice through the closed glass. Both bullets hit Virgil in the back of the head. He died instantly. Katie heard the sound of breaking glass. She rushed into the living room and found her husband bleeding and slumped in his chair. She ran to the phone to call for help. As she reached for the phone, the killer shot her twice through the same window. 1 bullet went through her right cheek and came out the back of her left ear. The other bullet struck her lower jaw and lodged under her tongue. The shots knocked out some of her teeth. Katie was badly wounded but still alive. The killer tried to break into the house through a kitchen window. Katie heard him struggling with the window. She knew she had to run. Despite her injuries, she fled out the front door in her nightgown. She ran across the highway to her sister's house, but no one was home. She kept running. She made it to the farmhouse of A.V. Prater, about 50 yards away from her sister's place. The Praters drove her to Michael Meagher Memorial Hospital. Doctors treated her wounds. Against all odds, Katie Starks survived. She would live until 1994. The Starks attack was different from the others. The previous attacks had all targeted young couples on lovers' lanes. Virgil and Katie were older. They were in their own home, not parked on a secluded road. The killer used a different weapon. Virgil was shot with a .22 caliber firearm, not the .32 caliber used in the previous murders. Because of these differences, some investigators questioned whether the Starks attack was committed by the same person, but other evidence suggested it was the same killer. Tire tracks, similar to those found at earlier crime scenes, were discovered near the farmhouse, and the attack followed the same 3-week pattern. The response to the Starks attack was massive. Between 20 and 30 police officers converged on the farmhouse. Sheriff W.E. Davis of Miller County called for roadblocks along Highway 67. Bloodhounds were brought in from Hope, Arkansas. The dogs picked up a scent trail that led from the house to the highway. Then the trail went cold. The killer had likely parked a car on the highway and driven away. At the crime scene, investigators found a flashlight in a hedge underneath the front window. It was described as an aluminum flashlight with red painted ends. Police sent it to the FBI crime lab in Washington, D.C. for fingerprint analysis, but no usable prints were found. On May 29th, the Texarkana Gazette ran a front-page story about the flashlight. It was the newspaper's first ever color photograph. Police hoped someone would recognize the flashlight and come forward with information. Nobody did. After the Starks attack, the phantom never struck again. Weeks passed, then months. The fear slowly began to ease. People started to unlock their doors again. Couples cautiously returned to lovers' lanes. Life in Texarkana gradually returned to normal. But the killings were never solved. There were suspects. The most significant suspect was a man named U.L. Lee Swinney. He was 29 years old and had a long criminal record. He had been arrested for car theft, counterfeiting, burglary, and assault. An Arkansas state trooper named Max Tackett noticed something interesting. Before each attack, a car was reported stolen. After each attack, the stolen car was found abandoned. Tackett began watching for stolen car reports. In late June 1946, police staked out a downtown parking lot where a stolen car had been abandoned. They arrested a 21-year-old woman who was driving the car. Her name was Peggy. She claimed to be U.L. Swinney's girlfriend. Under questioning, Peggy gave detailed statements about the murders. She said Swinney had confessed to her. She described the murder of Betty Jo Booker and Paul Martin in specific detail. She knew things that had not been released to the public. But Peggy's story kept changing. Sometimes she said she was with Swinney during the murders. Other times, she said she was not there. Her testimony became unreliable. Then she married Swinney. Under the law at that time, a wife could not be forced to testify against her husband. Without Peggy's testimony, prosecutors did not have enough evidence to charge Swinney with murder. Police did find some circumstantial evidence linking Swinney to the crimes. Peggy had been in possession of the car stolen on the weekend of the Griffin Moore murders. When Swinney was arrested, he repeatedly said things like, "You want me for more than stealing cars," or "You got me for more than stealing cars." He seemed terrified of being shot by police or sentenced to the electric chair. Peggy was able to identify the spot where Betty Jo Booker went into the woods. Despite the circumstantial evidence, Swinney was never charged with the murders. However, he was charged as a habitual criminal for repeated car theft. In 1947, he was sentenced to life in prison. He was released on appeal in 1973. He lived until 1994. He died in a Dallas nursing home. He never confessed to being the Phantom Killer. Interestingly, after Swinney's arrest in July 1946, the murders stopped. There were no more attacks. Was Swinney the Phantom? Many investigators believed he was, but without solid evidence, no one could say for certain. There were other suspects over the years. A university freshman named H.B. Tennyson committed suicide in 1948. He left behind a note that some people interpreted as a confession to the murders, but there was no other evidence connecting him to the crimes. Some believed the note was misunderstood or that Tennyson was troubled for other reasons. In 1999 and 2000, an anonymous woman contacted surviving family members of the victims. She apologized for what her father had done. But Ewell Swinney never had a daughter. The identity of the woman and the truth of her claims remain unknown. The impact of the murders on Texarkana was profound. For months, the town lived in fear. People armed themselves. Stores sold out of guns, ammunition, locks, and window shades. Families who had never locked their doors before now bolted them shut at night. Some nailed sheets over their windows or used screen door braces as window guards. A voluntary curfew was put in place. Businesses closed early. Nobody wanted to be outside after dark. The town that once felt safe now dreaded sundown. Young couples were especially affected. Lovers' lanes emptied. Parents forbade their teenagers from going out at night. Even decades later, survivors remembered the fear. One resident said people would stand outside their homes at night and yell at anyone approaching, demanding they identify themselves before coming closer. If you did not identify yourself, you risked getting shot. In 1976, 30 years after the murders, a filmmaker named Charles B. Pierce made a movie about the case. The film was called The Town That Dreaded Sundown. It starred Academy Award-winning actor Ben Johnson as a fictionalized version of Captain Gonzalez. Actress Dawn Wells, famous for playing Mary Ann on Gilligan's Island, portrayed Katie Starks. The film was loosely based on the true events, though many details were changed for dramatic effect. The movie's tagline read, "In 1946, this man killed 5 people. Today, he still lurks the streets of Texarkana, Arkansas." City officials in Texarkana, Arkansas, threatened to sue over this line. They did not want people to think the killer was still loose in their city. The distributor agreed to change the tagline, but it remained on the posters anyway. The film premiered in Texarkana on December 17, 1976. It was controversial. Some locals appreciated that the story was being told. Others felt it was exploitative. In 1978, Mark Melton Moore, the brother of victim Polly Ann Moore, sued the filmmakers for $1.3 million. He claimed the film depicted his sister as a high school dropout with loose morals, when in reality, she graduated high school at age 16. The lawsuit was unsuccessful. Despite the controversy, The Town That Dreaded Sundown became a cult classic. It is often credited by film critics and horror fans as influencing the look of Jason Voorhees in Friday the 13th Part 2, particularly the killer's white sack mask. The film is still shown every year in Texarkana. Since 2003, the city's Parks and Recreation Department has held an annual free screening at Spring Lake Park near Halloween. A remake of the film was released in 2014. To this day, the Texarkana Moonlight murders remain unsolved. The case is still technically open, though it is considered cold. Over the years, there have been many theories. Some people believe UL Swinney was guilty. Others think the real killer was never identified. A few have suggested that the Phantom Killer and the Zodiac Killer, who terrorized California in the 1960s, might be the same person. Both targeted couples, both struck at night, both wore masks, but there is no solid evidence linking the two cases. Modern investigators have looked at the case with fresh eyes. Advances in DNA technology have raised hopes that the case could be solved, but physical evidence from 1946 is scarce. Most of it has been lost or degraded over time. The witnesses and original investigators are nearly all dead now. The truth may never be known. What is known is this: in the spring of 1946, someone terrorized the town of Texarkana. That person attacked 8 people. 5 died, 3 survived. The killer was never caught. The case stands as one of the most infamous unsolved serial murder cases in American history. The Phantom Killer took 5 lives and left a scar on an entire community that has never fully healed. Texarkana learned to live with the fear, then learned to live with the mystery. But nearly 80 years later, the question still remains: who was the Phantom Killer? Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the Chino Hills Murders, 1983, California, USA. The Chino Hills Murders, 1983, California, USA. On the morning of June 5, 1983, Bill Hughes drove to a home in Chino Hills, California. His 11-year-old son Christopher had spent the night there with his friend Josh Ryan. Bill arrived around 11 in the morning. He knocked on the front door. Nobody answered. He looked around. The family's station wagon was missing. That was strange. Bill walked to the back of the house and peered through a sliding glass door. What he saw looked impossible. It looked like some kind of prank, but it was not a prank. Inside the house were the bodies of Doug Ryan, Peggy Ryan, their 10-year-old daughter Jessica, and Bill's son Christopher. They were dead. All 4 had been brutally killed during the night. Bill called for help. Police and paramedics arrived quickly. When they entered the home, they found a scene of unimaginable violence. The victims had been attacked with multiple weapons: a hatchet, a knife, an ice pick. According to the coroner's report, the 4 victims suffered a combined total of 140 wounds. They had 28 fractures between them. 2 fingers had been severed. The attack was savage and prolonged. But there was a survivor. 8-year-old Joshua Ryan, known as Josh, was still alive. His throat had been slashed from ear to ear. He had multiple stab wounds in his back. He had a hatchet wound to his head. He was barely breathing. Paramedics rushed him to Loma Linda University Medical Center. Doctors worked frantically to save his life. Against all odds, Josh survived. The Ryan family had lived in Chino Hills for several years. Doug Ryan was 41 years old. He was a chiropractor. He was also a former Marine who stood 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed about 180 pounds. Peggy Ryan was also 41. She was a chiropractor too, just like her mother. Peggy and Doug bred Arabian horses. They owned more than a dozen white Arabian show horses, including a champion stallion. They lived on a 5-acre hillside property with a barn and riding ring. The house itself was not fancy. It needed repairs, but the family was happy there. They had 2 children, Jessica and Josh. Christopher Hughes was their neighbor and Josh's best friend. He often spent the night at their house. On the evening of June 4th, 1983, the Ryans and Christopher attended a neighborhood potluck barbecue. It was a gathering of Arabian horse breeders and their families. About 100 people attended. The event was held at a neighbor's house in Chino Hills. Everyone seemed to have a good time. The Ryans and Christopher returned home that evening. Nobody knows exactly what time the attack happened. It was sometime in the early morning hours of June 5th. The murders shocked the community. Chino Hills was a wealthy, semi-rural area about 30 miles east of Los Angeles. It was a quiet place where people felt safe. The brutality of the killings terrified everyone. Police initially described the scene as Manson-style, referring to the 1969 murders committed by followers of Charles Manson. The comparison scared people even more. Investigators faced a massive crime scene. There was blood everywhere. The bedroom where the murders occurred was soaked with it. Blood covered the floors and walls. The amount of violence was staggering. Detectives wondered how one person could have done this. How could someone overpower 4 people, 2 of them adults, using 3 different weapons? Doug Ryan was a big man and a former military policeman. Peggy Ryan was athletic and strong. Both had loaded firearms close at hand. Doug kept a loaded rifle near his bed. Peggy kept a loaded pistol in her bedside drawer. Neither weapon was fired. When Deputy Sheriff Dale Sharp arrived at the hospital to question Josh, the boy could not talk. His throat was badly injured. Sharp told Josh to squeeze his hand if the answer to a question was yes. According to Sharp's report, Josh repeatedly indicated there were 3 attackers. Josh also spoke to a psychiatrist named Lorna Forbes. According to her notes, Josh said, "3 Mexicans chased us around the house, tried to fight them off. They came and hit me." Josh told this same story to at least 5 people while he was in the hospital. But investigators quickly focused on a different suspect, Kevin Cooper. Cooper was 25 years old. He was African American. He had escaped from a nearby prison just 2 days before the murders. The prison was called the California Institution for Men. It was located in Chino, less than 2 miles from the Ryan house. Cooper had been serving a 4-year sentence for burglary. He was housed in the minimum security section. On June 2, 1983, he climbed through a hole in the fence and walked away across an open field. After escaping, Cooper hid in a vacant house in Chino Hills. The house was owned by a man named Lease. It sat about 125 yards from the Ryan home. That is less than half the length of a football field. Cooper admitted to staying in the Lease house for 2 days. He made phone calls from there to his girlfriend, asking for money. She refused to help him. His last call from the house was around 8 o'clock in the evening on June 4th. Cooper said he left the Lease house on foot that night before the murders occurred. On June 5th, at 4:30 in the afternoon, Cooper checked into a hotel in Tijuana, Mexico. Tijuana is about 130 miles south of Chino Hills. There, Cooper met an American couple who owned a sailboat. He convinced them to hire him as a crew member. For the next 7 weeks, Cooper worked on their boat as it cruised along the coast of Baja California and Southern California. On July 30th, 1983, while the boat was docked in Santa Barbara, a woman on a nearby boat reported that she had been raped at knife point. She went to the sheriff's office to report the crime. While there, she saw a wanted poster with Cooper's photograph. She identified him as her attacker. Coast Guard and sheriff's deputies detained Cooper as he tried to swim away from the boat. Cooper was never charged with that rape. Investigators found several pieces of evidence that they said linked Cooper to the murders. The Ryan family's station wagon had been stolen. It was found several days later in Long Beach, about 50 miles southwest of Chino Hills. Inside the car, police found cigarette butts. One of them matched tobacco typically issued to inmates. They also found blood on 3 of the seats, suggesting multiple people had been in the car. Near the Ryan home, police found a blood-stained tan t-shirt and an orange towel. Some blood on the tan shirt matched Doug Ryan's blood type, but none of the blood on the shirt initially matched Kevin Cooper's blood type. Inside the Ryan house, investigators found a single drop of blood in the hallway, away from the main crime scene. This tiny drop was consistent with Cooper's blood type, but it was too small for definitive testing with the technology available at the time. Police also found a hatchet down the road from the Ryan home. It appeared to be one of the murder weapons. A hatchet had been reported missing from the Lease house, where Cooper admitted to staying. After searching the Lease house a second time, deputies recovered a hatchet sheath there. They also claimed to find a green button from a prison jacket. However, there was a problem with this evidence. Cooper had been wearing a brown prison jacket when he escaped, not a green one. The brown jacket had different buttons. There was another potential suspect. A woman named Diana Roper called the sheriff's office on the same day that charges against Cooper were announced. Roper said she believed the murders had been committed by her boyfriend, Eugene Leland Furrow. Furrow was white and had recently been released from prison for murder. Roper said that early on the morning after the murders, Furrow appeared at her home driving a station wagon. He was wearing blood-spattered coveralls. She turned the coveralls over to the police. She also said that on June 4th, she had laid out clothes for Furrow, including a tan t-shirt. After the murder, that shirt was gone. When she learned that a hatchet had been found near the crime scene, Roper called back to say she had checked Furrow's toolbox and a hatchet was missing. Despite this information, investigators did not pursue Furrow as a serious suspect. Cooper was arrested and charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. His trial was moved from San Bernardino County to San Diego County because of extensive publicity and concerns about prejudice. The trial began in September 1984. The prosecution presented their evidence. They showed the jury the bloody shoe print found on a sheet in Doug and Peggy's bedroom. They said it matched the type of shoes worn by prison inmates. They presented the cigarette butts, the blood evidence, and testimony about the hatchet. The defense pointed out many problems with the case. How could one man, weighing only 155 pounds, overpower a 6'2" former Marine and his athletic wife, both armed, plus 2 children? Why would a single attacker use 3 or 4 different weapons? How could he prevent anyone from escaping or calling for help while attacking multiple people in different rooms? The defense also highlighted the initial statements by Josh Ryan about 3 attackers. But by the time of the trial, Josh's testimony had changed. He was now 10 years old. He testified that he saw a single attacker. However, he could not identify the killer. In an audio tape with his psychiatrist, Josh said he saw the back of a man attacking his mother. He did not see the man's face. The inconsistencies in Josh's statements troubled some observers. The jury convicted Cooper on all counts. The verdict came after 6 days of deliberation. 10 days later, the jury recommended the death penalty. On May 15, 1985, Judge Richard Garner sentenced Kevin Cooper to death. Cooper remained silent during the sentencing hearing on advice of his attorney. His lawyer told the court that Cooper maintained his innocence. But the case did not end there. Over the years, serious questions emerged about the evidence and the investigation. In 2001, Cooper petitioned for DNA testing on key pieces of evidence. At the time, DNA technology had advanced significantly since the original trial. Cooper's attorneys believed DNA testing would prove his innocence. In 2002, the results came back. The evidence tested positive for Cooper's DNA. The tan t-shirt had his blood on it. The cigarette butts found in the stolen station wagon matched his DNA. The tiny drop of blood found in the Ryan house was his. Cooper was devastated. He had been certain the DNA tests would exonerate him, but he insisted the evidence had been planted. His attorney, Norman Heil, had a theory about how it could have happened. When Cooper was arrested, police took a vial of his blood. That vial sat unsealed in the San Bernardino County Crime Lab for 12 years. No log, video, or tracking system monitored who had access to it. It was only in 1995 that a tamper evidence seal was finally applied. During those 12 years, anyone could have opened the vial without detection. When independent laboratories later tested Cooper's blood vial, they found something disturbing. The vial contained DNA from a second person. A reference sample should only contain one person's DNA. This suggested contamination or tampering. Even more suspicious, testing found that blood on the tan t-shirt contained EDTA. EDTA is a chemical preservative used in blood collection tubes. It should not be present in blood from a crime scene. Its presence suggested the blood had come from a preserved sample, not from a fresh wound. In 2019, when authorities tried to test the blood vial again for additional DNA analysis, they discovered it was empty. All the blood was gone. Nobody could explain where it went or how an entire vial of blood could have been consumed in testing. Other evidence raised more questions. Multiple witnesses reported seeing 3 white men in a vehicle matching the description of the Ryan stolen station wagon near the time of the murders. Witnesses at a nearby bar said they saw 3 white men in bloody clothes acting strangely on the night of the crime. The stolen station wagon had blood on the driver's seat, front passenger seat, and back seat, suggesting at least 3 people had been in the car. Hair samples were found clutched in Jessica Ryan's hand and at the crime scene. These hairs were never adequately tested. An orange towel found at the scene yielded a full DNA profile that matched neither Cooper nor any of the victims. If the DNA profile could be identified, it might point to the real killer. Questions also emerged about how evidence was found. Police searched the lease house where Cooper had been hiding. They found nothing linking him to the murders, but after they identified Cooper as their primary suspect, they searched again. Suddenly, they found the hatchet sheath and the green prison button. Critics argued this pattern repeated itself throughout the investigation. Areas would be searched, nothing would be found, and then after investigators focused on Cooper, evidence would mysteriously appear. Key people involved in the investigation later got in trouble with the law. The San Bernardino County Sheriff himself was later convicted of stealing more than 500 guns from the evidence room. Another person who worked in the lab and found evidence against Cooper admitted to stealing heroin from the evidence room. These facts raised doubts about the integrity of the investigation. Cooper's case attracted national attention. New York Times columnist Nicholas Kristof wrote extensively about the case, arguing that Cooper may have been framed. U.S. Senator Kamala Harris, who as California Attorney General had initially opposed further DNA testing, later said she regretted that decision and called for testing. The American Bar Association, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and even reality television star Kim Kardashian called for new investigations. In 2018, then-Governor Jerry Brown ordered DNA testing on 4 pieces of evidence. In 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom expanded the testing to include additional items, including hair samples, blood samples, fingernail scrapings, and a green button. Newsom said, "Especially in cases where the government seeks to impose the ultimate punishment of death, I need to be satisfied that all relevant evidence is carefully and fairly examined." In 2021, Newsom ordered an independent investigation by the law firm Morrison and Foerster. The firm spent 2 years reviewing the case, including analyzing the new DNA test results. In January 2023, they released their report. The conclusion was that the evidence of Cooper's guilt is extensive and conclusive. The report found that DNA evidence connected Cooper to the crime scene and the stolen vehicle. The report stated that claims of planted evidence were not supported. However, critics immediately challenged the Morrison and Foerster report. They pointed out that the firm did not review all the sheriff's department files. The firm did not fully investigate claims of police misconduct. The report focused primarily on whether DNA evidence proved Cooper's guilt, not on whether the evidence had been tampered with or planted. Some legal experts called the investigation inadequate and said it failed basic standards for a thorough post-conviction review. Today, Kevin Cooper remains on death row at San Quentin State Prison. He is now 66 years old. He has been there since 1985. He continues to maintain his innocence. Governor Newsom declared a moratorium on executions in California in 2019, so Cooper will not be executed as long as that moratorium remains in place. The lone survivor, Josh Ryan, has said publicly that he believes Cooper is guilty and that DNA testing proves it. Josh says Cooper needs to pay for his crime so the families can have closure. He has few memories of that terrible night. As an adult, Josh has chosen to live a private life away from public attention. The Chino Hills murders remain one of the most controversial cases in California history. To some, Kevin Cooper is clearly guilty. The DNA evidence points to him. He was near the crime scene. He fled to Mexico. He has a criminal history. To others, Cooper was framed by corrupt police who planted evidence to convict a black man for the murders of a white family. They point to Josh's initial statements about 3 attackers, the suspicious handling of evidence, the EDTA found in the blood, the contaminated blood vial, and the pattern of evidence mysteriously appearing after police focused on Cooper. What is certain is this: on June 5, 1983. 4 people were brutally murdered in a home in Chino Hills, California. Douglas and Peggy Ryan, both 41 years old, died alongside their 10-year-old daughter Jessica and 11-year-old Christopher Hughes. 8-year-old Joshua Ryan survived but lost his entire family. The killings were savage. The investigation was deeply flawed. The evidence has been questioned. And more than 40 years later, serious doubts remain about whether the right person was convicted. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have the Gold Coast Murders, 1999, Australia. The Gold Coast Murders, 1999, Australia. On the evening of Saturday, July 14, 2001, Peter Falconio and Joanne Lees were driving through the Australian outback. They were young British backpackers traveling in an orange Volkswagen Combi van. Peter was 28 years old. Joanne was 27. They were from West Yorkshire, in England. They had been together for about 5 years. They were on the adventure of a lifetime, driving across one of the most remote places on Earth. The Stuart Highway is a long, lonely road that runs through the center of Australia. It stretches for thousands of miles through the Northern Territory, connecting the southern city of Adelaide to the northern city of Darwin. Much of the highway passes through desert. There are long stretches where you can drive for hours without seeing another person. That night, Peter and Joanne were heading north toward a place called Devil's Marbles, a natural rock formation in the outback. Around 7:30 in the evening, they were driving through an area near a tiny settlement called Barrow Creek. Barrow Creek sits between Alice Springs and Tennant Creek. It is one of the most isolated places in Australia. The couple had noticed a vehicle following them since they stopped at a roadhouse earlier. They expected the vehicle to overtake them. Instead, when it drew alongside, the driver made excited gestures at them. He was indicating that they should pull over. He was driving a white Toyota 4-wheel drive with a green canvas canopy. Peter pulled the Combi van off the road. The other vehicle stopped ahead of them. Peter got out and walked over to speak with the man. The man told Peter that he had seen sparks shooting out of the van's exhaust pipe. He suggested they check it together. Peter agreed. The 2 men walked to the rear of the Combi to investigate. Joanne moved into the driver's seat, ready to rev the engine if Peter needed her to. Then she heard a loud bang. At first it sounded like a car backfiring, but it also sounded like a gunshot. Joanne called out for Peter. He did not answer. Moments later, the man appeared at the window of the Combi. He was pointing a silver handgun directly at her head. Joanne was terrified. She kept shouting for Peter, but he did not respond. She realized something terrible had happened. The man with the gun grabbed Joanne. He tied her wrists together behind her back using cable ties and masking tape. He put a hessian sack over her head. Then he forced her into his vehicle. Joanne was pushed between the seats and into the rear section of his truck. She was certain she was going to die. She later said she was more afraid of being raped than being shot. But while the man was distracted, Joanne managed to work her bound hands from behind her back to in front of her body. She had been flexible and athletic, and she used that to her advantage. When the man turned away, she slipped out of the vehicle and ran. She ran into the darkness of the outback bush. She could hear the man searching for her. He had a dog with him. He used a torch to scan the area. Joanne hid under bushes and behind scrub. She stayed perfectly still and quiet. For 5 hours, she hid in the freezing desert night, terrified he would find her. Finally, around 2 in the morning, Joanne heard the sound of an engine. A road train, which is a large truck, was approaching on the highway. She ran out onto the road and flagged it down. The driver was a man named Vince Millar. Joanne's hands were still bound. She was covered in dirt and scratches. She was in shock. Millar immediately knew something was very wrong. He took her to the nearest roadhouse and called the police. When police arrived, Joanne told them what had happened. She said a man had attacked them. She heard a gunshot. Peter had disappeared. She believed he had been shot and killed. Police immediately went to the scene. They found the orange Combi van where Peter and Joanne had left it. There was a small amount of blood on the road near where the van was parked, but there was no sign of Peter. There was no body, no other evidence to show where he had gone. A massive search began. Police, Volunteers and Aboriginal trackers scoured the area. They searched for days, then weeks, then months. They used helicopters, search dogs, and ground teams. They searched thousands of square kilometers of desert, but Peter Falconio was never found. His body has never been recovered, not to this day. The case became one of the biggest news stories in Australia and the United Kingdom. A young British couple attacked on a remote highway. One murdered, one escaped. No body, no suspect. The mystery captured international attention. Media from around the world descended on the Northern Territory. The case was compared to other famous Australian crimes, including the Chamberlain case and the backpacker murders of the 1990s. In the days and weeks after the attack, Joanne faced intense scrutiny. Some people questioned her story. Some media outlets suggested she might have been involved in Peter's disappearance. This was deeply unfair and hurtful to Joanne, who was a victim and a traumatized witness. She later wrote about how difficult it was to be treated with suspicion when she had just survived a horrific attack and lost the man she loved. Police worked tirelessly to find the killer. They examined CCTV footage from roadhouses and service stations along the Stewart Highway. They interviewed hundreds of people. They followed up on countless tips. Then, in November 2003, more than 2 years after the attack, they arrested a man named Bradley John Murdoch. Bradley Murdoch was born on February 19, 1958, in Geraldton, Western Australia. He was 45 years old at the time of his arrest. He had a long criminal history. He had been involved with biker gangs. He had convictions for assault, drug trafficking, and other offenses. At the time of Peter's murder, Murdoch had been traveling around the outback in a white Toyota four-wheel drive with a green canvas canopy. This matched the description Joanne had given. Murdoch was initially arrested in South Australia on unrelated charges. He was accused of raping and falsely imprisoning a 12-year-old girl. A jury acquitted him of those charges, but the case allowed Northern Territory police to obtain his DNA. When they tested it, they found a match. Murdoch's DNA was found on the cable ties that had been used to bind Joanne's wrists. His DNA was also found on her t-shirt. This was the breakthrough investigators needed. Murdoch was charged with the murder of Peter Falconio and with assaulting and attempting to kidnap Joanne Lees. His trial began on October 17, 2005, in Darwin, the capital of the Northern Territory. The courthouse had been renovated at a cost of $900,000 Australian dollars to handle the trial and the huge media presence. The judge was Brian Ross Martin, the Chief Justice of the Northern Territory. Murdoch pleaded not guilty to all charges. He claimed he had never met Peter Falconio or Joanne Lees. He said he was not even in the area at the time of the attack. But the evidence against him was strong. Joanne identified him from police photographs in November 2002. During the trial, she identified him again face to face. She was certain he was the man who attacked her. The prosecution presented the DNA evidence. They showed that Murdoch's DNA was on the cable ties and on Joanne's shirt. They presented testimony from an Aboriginal tracker named Teddy Egan, who confirmed that Joanne had hidden in the bush exactly as she described. Joanne demonstrated to the jury how she had been able to maneuver her bound hands from behind her back to in front of her body. This was a key part of her testimony, showing how she escaped. The trial lasted nearly 2 months. On December 13, 2005, the jury reached a verdict. They found Bradley Murdoch guilty of murdering Peter Falconio. They also found him guilty of assaulting Joanne Lees and depriving her of her liberty. The verdict was unanimous. Murdoch showed no emotion when the verdict was read. The judge sentenced Murdoch to life in prison with a non-parole period of 28 years. In his sentencing remarks, the judge called Murdoch a cold-blooded killer who has shown no remorse. Murdoch was sent to Darwin Correctional Center, later moved to Alice Springs Correctional Center to serve his sentence. But one crucial question remained unanswered. Where is Peter Falconio's body? Murdoch has never revealed what he did with Peter's remains. Despite extensive searches over more than 2 decades, the body has never been found. Police believe Murdoch disposed of Peter's body somewhere in the vast expanse of desert between Alice Springs and Broome in Western Australia. That is an area covering more than 2,000 kilometers. Finding anything in that remote, harsh landscape is nearly impossible. In 2016, the Northern Territory government passed new legislation known as the No Body, No Parole law. This law specifically targeted Murdoch. It means that a convicted murderer cannot be released on parole unless they reveal the location of their victim's remains. Even when Murdoch's non-parole period ends in 2032, he cannot be released unless he cooperates. The law was designed to pressure Murdoch to finally tell the truth about what he did with Peter. But Murdoch continued to maintain his innocence. He lodged 2 appeals against his conviction. Both were unsuccessful. He was forbidden from speaking to the media. In a 2020 documentary on Channel 4 in the United Kingdom, Murdoch was recorded in a phone call from prison saying, "I'm a rat bag. I've belted a lot of people. I've run a bit of pot, but I'm not a murderer." He refused to admit his guilt. In 2019, Murdoch was diagnosed with terminal throat cancer. He received chemotherapy at Alice Springs Hospital. By June 2025, his condition had deteriorated significantly. He was moved from Alice Springs Correctional Center to the palliative care unit at Alice Springs Hospital. He was 67 years old. He was in the final stages of terminal cancer. On July 15, 2025, Bradley Murdoch died. He died without ever revealing where he hid Peter Falconio's body. The Northern Territory Police Force released a statement expressing deep regret that Murdoch died without disclosing the location of Peter's remains. They said his silence denied the Falconio family the closure they deserved. Police announced that the reward for information leading to Peter's remains had been increased to 500,000 Australian dollars. That is approximately 240,000 British pounds, or 330,000 US dollars. But so far, no one has come forward with information. Peter's parents, Luciano and Joan Falconio, spoke about Murdoch's death. Luciano said, "I don't wish anybody dead because you only have one life, but I wish Murdoch left something for me to find him." Joan said, "His life stopped on a lonely road, shot dead by cowardly Murdoch, who will not reveal where or what he did with him. The family's pain continues. They cannot hold a proper funeral. They cannot lay Peter to rest. They do not have closure." Joanne Lees returned to the United Kingdom after the trial. She rarely speaks publicly about what happened. In 2006, she published a memoir called No Turning Back. She wrote it to reclaim her story from others who had told it incorrectly or used it for their own purposes. In the book, she described the attack, the investigation, the trial, and her struggle to rebuild her life. She received £50,000 for a televised interview with journalist Martin Bashir, which helped raise awareness of the case. In 2017, Joanne gave an interview to the Australian television program 60 Minutes. She said she still wanted to bring Peter home. She has never married or had children. She lives quietly in the north of England. She has worked at a travel agency and as a social worker with disabled people. She studied sociology at university. She has tried to move forward with her life, but the trauma of that night stays with her. The case has had a lasting impact on Australia. It affected how people viewed the safety of traveling in the outback. International tourism was impacted, especially among backpackers. The Stuart Highway, once seen as a great adventure route, became associated with danger. The case partly inspired the 2005 horror film Wolf Creek, which depicts backpackers being attacked in the Australian outback. In 2007, the Australian television network Channel 10 produced a docudrama about the case called Joanne Lees, Murder in the Outback. It was also shown on ITV in the United Kingdom. The film told the story from Joanne's perspective. Actress Joanne Froggatt played Joanne Lees. Actor Lawrence Broyles played Peter Falconio. The film helped keep the case in the public consciousness. The mystery of what happened to Peter's body continues to haunt everyone involved. Prosecutors believe Murdoch buried or hid Peter's body somewhere in the remote desert. The area is so vast and so harsh that finding remains after all this time would require incredible luck or someone with knowledge coming forward. Some have speculated that Murdoch burned the body or disposed of it in a way that makes recovery impossible. Over the years, there have been several searches based on tips and new information. In 2019, police conducted a 5-day search, including emptying an outback well. They found nothing. Every lead has turned into a dead end. The case remains officially unsolved in one crucial way. Peter Falconio's body has not been found. Until it is, the Falconio family cannot have complete closure. Bradley Murdoch took that secret to his grave. He robbed the family not only of Peter's life, but also of the chance to say goodbye properly. Peter Falconio would have been 52 years old today. His family remembers him as a kind, adventurous young man who loved life and loved Joanne. His murder on a lonely stretch of highway in the Australian outback remains one of the most well-known true crime cases in Australian history. It is a reminder of the dangers that can exist even in the most beautiful places and the cruelty of those who refuse to show mercy or remorse, even at the end of their own lives. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the Yogurt Shop Murders, 1991, Austin, Texas. The Yogurt Shop Murders, 1991, Austin, Texas. On the evening of December 6, 1991, 4 teenage girls walked into an I can't believe it's yogurt shop in North Austin, Texas. 2 of them were there to work the closing shift. The other 2 were waiting for a ride home. None of them would leave alive. The shop was located at 2949 West Anderson Lane, in a busy shopping area near North Cross Mall. 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison and 17-year-old Eliza Thomas were both employees. They had worked together many times before. Jennifer's younger sister, 15-year-old Sarah Harbison, and their friend, 13-year-old Amy Ayers, had come to meet them. The plan was simple. The 2 younger girls would wait while Jennifer and Eliza closed up the store. Then Jennifer would drive everyone home. The shop was scheduled to close at 11 p.m. Around 10 p.m., a man came into the shop and asked to use the bathroom. The girls let him in. He went to the back of the store where the restroom was located. He stayed in there for a while. Investigators would later believe he may have jammed open a rear door at that time. A couple who left the shop just before 11 p.m. noticed 2 men sitting at a table acting strangely. They seemed nervous. The couple thought their behavior was odd, but did not report it at the time. Shortly before midnight, a patrol officer from the Austin Police Department was driving past the yogurt shop. He noticed flames coming from the building. He immediately radioed his dispatcher to report a fire. The Austin Fire Department responded within minutes. When firefighters entered the building and put out the flames, they made a horrifying discovery. Inside were the bodies of 4 girls. The scene was devastating. Each girl had been shot in the head with a .22 caliber pistol. All 4 had been stripped naked. 3 of them, Sarah, Eliza, and Jennifer, had been bound and gagged using their own underwear and clothing. Their bodies were severely burned from the fire. They had been shot execution style in the back of the head. Amy's body was found in a different part of the shop. She was not as badly charred as the others, but she had 2nd and early 3rd degree burns covering 25 to 30% of her body. She had a sock-like cloth around her neck. She had been shot twice. The first bullet missed her brain, but the second one caused severe damage, exiting through her cheek and jawline. Amy had also been shot with a different gun, a .380 caliber pistol. Investigators would learn that at least 3 of the girls had been sexually assaulted. The fire had been set intentionally to destroy evidence. The murders shocked Austin. This was 1991, and the city was smaller then, with a population of around 500,000 people. Austin was known as a safe, progressive college town. This kind of violent crime was almost unheard of. The community was devastated. Parents became terrified for their children's safety. The murders happened just weeks before Christmas. The victims were quickly identified. Jennifer Harbison was a hard-working high school senior. She had dreams and plans for the future. Her younger sister Sarah was a high school freshman who loved sports and was active in school clubs. Their mother, Barbara Harbison, later told reporters that her entire life had been focused on her daughters. Someone had taken eternity away from her, she said. The Harbisons had lost their only children. Eliza Thomas was also 17. She was described as responsible and mature beyond her years. Her younger sister, Sonora, was 13 at the time of the murder. Sonora later recalled the shock of losing her only sibling. She remembers fantasizing for days that Eliza had somehow escaped and would come back home. Years later, Sonora would say that she had never woken up on a day when her sister wasn't alive until that morning. Amy Ayers was the youngest victim at 13 years old. She was a country girl who loved animals. She dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Her father, Bob Ayers, spoke about losing his daughter. He would never see her graduate. He would never see her become a veterinarian. He lost his first dance with her. She was a daddy's girl. All 4 girls were active members of Future Farmers of America. They had met through the organization and had become close friends. The Austin Police Department immediately formed a task force dedicated to solving the case. The FBI and other government agencies were called in to assist, but the investigation faced enormous challenges from the start. The fire had destroyed crucial physical evidence. Smoke and soot covered every surface, making fingerprinting nearly impossible. The automatic sprinklers in the building had gone off, further damaging potential evidence. Whatever DNA or trace evidence might have existed was largely compromised by the fire and water. Despite these obstacles, investigators collected what evidence they could. They took DNA swabs from the victims during autopsies. They collected shell casings and bullet fragments. They interviewed hundreds of people and followed thousands of leads. Just a few days after the murders, police discovered a gun on a 16-year-old named Maurice Pierce. He was arrested at a local mall. The gun was a .22 caliber, one of the types used in the murders. Under questioning, Pierce mentioned 3 friends: Forrest Wellborn, Robert Springsteen, and Michael Scott. All 4 of these teenagers were questioned in December of 1991, but there was not enough evidence to charge any of them. They were released. The case went cold. Years passed. The families grieved without answers. The lead investigator, John Jones, worked tirelessly on the case but eventually developed PTSD from the trauma of the investigation. He was taken off the case and struggled with guilt over the department's inability to solve the murders. Another investigator, Hector Polanco, was found to have coerced a suspect into giving a false confession. He was reassigned. The Ayers family even hired a private investigator, frustrated by the lack of progress. Then, in 1999, nearly 8 years after the murders, a new detective named Paul Johnson took over the case. He decided to take a fresh look at everything. He revisited old evidence and old interviews. In September of 1999, Michael Scott was brought in for questioning. He was interrogated for more than 18 hours. Eventually, he confessed. Scott said that he and his friends had gone to the yogurt shop intending to rob it, but things had gone terribly wrong. He implicated Robert Springsteen. When Springsteen was questioned, he also confessed and pointed the finger back at Scott. Both would later say their confessions were coerced. Defense attorneys claimed that investigators fed the suspects details about the crime that they then repeated under pressure. In October of 1999, all 4 men were arrested and charged with capital murder: Maurice Pierce, Forrest Wellborn, Robert Springsteen, and Michael Scott. But the case against them quickly began to fall apart. In May of 2000, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms released a report finding that the gun discovered on Maurice Pierce back in December of 1991 was probably not the murder weapon. In June of 2000, DNA testing showed that none of the 4 men's DNA was found at the crime scene. Tests checked for DNA from sexual assault, fingernails, and other evidence. Nothing matched any of the 4 suspects. The charges against Forrest Wellborn were thrown out when a grand jury declined to indict him. The charges against Maurice Pierce were also dropped. That left Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott. They were both sent to trial, even though the only evidence against them was their confessions. Both defendants said their confessions were false and coerced. Neither man would testify against the other. So prosecutors read parts of each man's confession to the jury during the other's trial. This meant the confessions were used against both men, but neither defendant could cross-examine the other about what they had said. In 2001, Robert Springsteen was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death. In 2002, Michael Scott was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. It looked like the case was finally solved, but it wasn't over. The convictions were challenged on constitutional grounds. The Sixth Amendment gives defendants the right to confront their accusers. In this case, Springsteen and Scott's confessions had been used against each other, but they were never allowed to question each other in court. In 2006, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned Springsteen's conviction. In 2007, Scott's conviction was also overturned. Prosecutors intended to retry both men, but before the new trials could begin, more DNA testing was done. A new type of testing called YSTR testing was used on the crime scene evidence. It tests male DNA specifically. The profile did not match any of the 4 suspects. In 2009, all charges were dismissed. Springsteen and Scott had spent years in prison for crimes they did not commit. Maurice Pierce died in December of 2010. He was stopped for a traffic violation and fled on foot. An Austin police officer named Frank Wilson caught up with him. The 2 men struggled. Pierce removed a knife from Officer Wilson's belt and stabbed him in the neck. Officer Wilson shot and killed Pierce. Officer Wilson survived his injuries. Once again, the case went cold. The families were devastated. They had believed justice had been done, only to have those convictions overturned. Now they were back to having no answers. But investigators never gave up. In January of 2017, the Travis County District Attorney formed a new team to work on the case. They partnered with the Austin Police Department's Cold Case Unit. Office space was dedicated just for the yogurt shop team to store evidence and continue investigating. DNA technology continued to improve. In 2017, an Austin detective submitted DNA evidence from one of the victims into a database for genealogy purposes. This type of DNA testing can identify male relatives of suspects. There was a match. Police requested more information, but the FBI did not provide it. The investigation continued. In 2022, Detective Daniel Jackson was assigned to the case. He met with DNA and genealogy experts. He identified items from the crime scene that could potentially be retested with newer methods. In June of 2025, Detective Jackson had an idea. He realized that a .380 caliber shell casing found in a drain at the crime scene had not been submitted into NIBIN in many years. NIBIN stands for National Integrated Ballistic Information Network. It's a database that matches bullets and shell casings to guns used in different crimes. The software had greatly improved since the last time this casing was tested. In July of 2025, there was a hit. The shell casing matched a gun used in an unsolved murder in Kentucky in 1998. That murder had similar details to the yogurt shop case. This was a major breakthrough. Detectives began investigating the Kentucky case and looking for connections. At the same time, investigators were working with DNA. They contacted labs that could do YSTR typing and asked them to manually search their databases against the unknown DNA profile from the yogurt shop crime scene. The South Carolina State Lab was the only lab in the country that responded with a match. The DNA belonged to a man named Robert Eugene Brashers. Robert Eugene Brashers was born on March 13, 1958, in Newport News, Virginia. He grew up in Huntsville, Alabama. After high school, he joined the Army and served for several years. In the early 1980s, he left the military and moved around the southern states. In November of 1985, Brashers was arrested in Port St. Lucie, Florida. He had met a 24-year-old woman and convinced her to go with him to a bar. When she refused his sexual advances and tried to leave his vehicle, he shot her twice in the neck and head. The woman survived. She managed to escape and hide in a culvert under the road. She was found and taken to a hospital, where she described her attacker to police. Brashers was arrested that same night. He was convicted of attempted first-degree murder, aggravated battery, and using a firearm during a crime. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Brashers only served part of his sentence. He was granted parole on May 4, 1989. He had been in prison for less than 4 years. 2.5 years later, he would murder 4 girls in Austin. After his release, Brashers continued committing violent crimes. In April of 1990, he raped and murdered a woman named Genevieve Zitricki in Greenville, South Carolina. She was 28 years old. He bludgeoned her, raped her, and strangled her with pantyhose in her apartment. He then dragged her body into a bathtub and submerged it. He wrote, "Don't fuck with my family" on the bathroom mirror. This crime would not be connected to Brashers until decades later. In December of 1991, Brashers was in Texas. On December 6th, he entered the yogurt shop in Austin. Investigators believe he either came in during business hours and waited, or he entered through a back door that may have been left open. He attacked the 4 girls. He bound and gagged them with their own clothing. He sexually assaulted 3 of them. He shot all 4 of them in the head with a .22 caliber pistol. He shot Amy Ayers a second time with a .380 caliber pistol. Then he set the building on fire and fled. Less than 48 hours later, on December 8, 1991, Brashers was stopped by Border Patrol at a westbound checkpoint between El Paso, Texas, and Las Cruces, New Mexico. He was driving a stolen car that had Georgia plates. He was in possession of a .380 caliber pistol. The gun was an AMT backup model. This would later be identified as the exact make and model used to shoot Amy Ayers. Border Patrol let him go at the time, not knowing he was connected to the Austin murders. Brashers continued his crime spree. In 1992, he was arrested in Georgia for theft and weapon charges. He served 5 years and was released in 1997. He then committed more sexual assaults and murders in Tennessee and Missouri through 1998. On January 13, 1999, police tracked Brashers to a Super 8 motel in Kennett, Missouri. He was hiding there with his wife, daughter, and 2 stepdaughters. When police tried to arrest him, he took his family hostage. After an hour-long standoff, he released them. Then he shot himself in the head. He died 6 days later, on January 19, 1999. He was 40 years old. At the time of his death, Robert Eugene Brashers was not identified as a serial killer. He was just another criminal who had died during a standoff with police. His crimes remained unsolved. But advances in forensic technology would eventually expose the truth. In 2018, genealogist C.C. Moore from Parabon Nanolabs used investigative genetic genealogy to identify Brashers as a suspect in 3 murders and several rapes dating back to 1990. Prosecutors in Missouri filed a motion to exhume his body. On September 27, 2018, his remains were dug up from a cemetery in Paragould, Arkansas. DNA was extracted from his bones. The DNA testing confirmed that Brashers' genetic profile was a perfect match for multiple unsolved crimes, including the murder of Genevieve Zitricki in South Carolina, the murders of Sherry and Megan Scherer in Missouri, and the sexual assault of the 14-year-old girl in Memphis. He was connected to at least 8 murders and multiple rapes across several states. But he had never been connected to the yogurt shop murders, not until 2025. When Detective Jackson got the DNA match from the South Carolina lab, everything started falling into place. Brashers' DNA was found under Amy Ayers' fingernails. It was a match with odds of 2.5 million to 1. His DNA was also found in the sexual assault kits of 3 of the 4 victims. The ballistics evidence lined up. Brashers had been caught with a .380 pistol just 2 days after the murders, and it was the same make and model that killed Amy Ayers. He died by suicide in 1999 with that same gun. Brashers' pattern of crimes matched the yogurt shop murders perfectly. He had a history of tying victims up with their own clothing. He always carried multiple weapons. He was known to work alone, never with an accomplice. In 1997, investigators documented a case where he controlled 4 women alone in Memphis, tied them up, and sexually assaulted one of them. This proved he was capable of controlling multiple victims by himself. On Friday, September 27, 2024, the Austin Police Department announced that they had identified Robert Eugene Brashers as the suspect in the 1991 yogurt shop murders. On Monday, September 30th, police held a press conference to explain how they reached this conclusion. City leaders, law enforcement officials, cold case detectives, forensic experts, and family members of the victims all attended. Austin Police Chief Lisa Davis said the case was one of the most devastating and haunting in the city's history. She said the only physical evidence from the crime scene matched Brasher's. Detective Daniel Jackson said solving the case required a combination of technology, good police work from multiple agencies, cooperation, and timing. He told the families that the discovery of Brasher's as the suspect simply was not possible until 2025. He apologized that it took 34 years to get there, but they were finally there. He said that Amy Ayers' final moments on Earth were spent fighting back, and it was because of her fighting back that the case was solved. The families of the victims spoke at the press conference. Barbara Ayers Wilson, the mother of Jennifer and Sarah Harbison, said she was full of gratitude. It had been so long, and all they ever wanted was the truth. They never wanted anyone to go to jail or be charged with anything they did not do. Sonora Thomas, Eliza's sister, said that while knowing what happened to her sister eases her suffering, it does not change her reality. Their families are still too small, still missing an essential ingredient. They have been robbed of a life with nieces and nephews and grandchildren and sisters to grow old with. Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen, the two men who had been wrongfully convicted, also released statements. Michael Scott said the case stole decades of his life, but the truth had finally come to light. Travis County District Attorney Jose Garza said his office would take responsibility for wrongly prosecuting Scott, Springsteen, and Pierce. He said, "The overwhelming weight of the evidence points to the guilt of one man and the innocence of four." Robert Eugene Brasher's daughter, Deborah Brashers, spoke to the media. She said she believes her father could be responsible for the yogurt shop killings. She first learned about her father's criminal past in 2018. She said it has been difficult being associated with him. She wanted the families of victims to understand that she is sorry for his actions. She called her father a coward. "He deserved to be here and be put through whatever he put other people through," she said. She apologized on behalf of her father, even though she knew it was not her place. She said that half of her DNA came from the person who hurt them the most, and she wanted them to know how sorry she was. The case remains officially open. There are still investigative steps underway, but for the first time in 34 years, the families have answers. They know who killed their daughters and sisters. They know the 4 young men who were arrested in 1999 were innocent. They know that justice, while delayed, has finally been served in the form of truth. The yogurt shop murders changed Austin forever. It shattered the city's sense of safety and became one of the most notorious unsolved crimes in Texas history. For decades, the case haunted the families who lost their daughters, the detectives who worked tirelessly to solve it, and the community that demanded answers. Today, a nail salon operates where the yogurt shop once stood. Outside, there is a memorial honoring Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers, 4 teenage girls whose lives were stolen on a December night in 1991. Their families never gave up. Investigators never stopped working. Technology continued to advance. And in the end, the truth came out. Robert Eugene Brashers killed those 4 girls. He was a serial killer who escaped justice during his lifetime, but he could not escape it forever. The case shows the power of persistence, the importance of DNA technology, and the devastating consequences of wrongful convictions. Sometimes, justice takes time, but the relentless pursuit of truth can finally bring answers to families who have waited decades. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the Cheryl Henry and Andy Atkinson murders 1990, Texas. The Cheryl Henry and Andy Atkinson murders 1990, Texas. On the night of August 22, 1990, 22-year-old Cheryl Henry and 21-year-old Andy Atkinson went out for what should have been a fun evening in Houston, Texas. They had only known each other for a couple of weeks, but they were already falling in love. Neither of them would make it home alive. Cheryl was a bubbly blonde with an infectious laugh. She had recently moved back to Houston after attending Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches. She worked at a nightclub called Rick's Cabaret. She was the type of person whose eyes lit up when she was happy. Her sister Meredith Colvert later described how Cheryl reacted when she first met Andy. She thought he was amazing, inside and out, Meredith said. He had a great smile, but his mind was wonderful too. Andy was an aspiring model with piercing green eyes and a smile that people said you could not forget. He had just graduated from college in North Carolina and had moved to Houston to be closer to his father's family. His father, Garland Atkinson, managed a club called Dream Street, and Andy occasionally worked the door there. Andy also had a job at Gold's Gym. His father later said they were not only father and son but best friends. That Wednesday night, Cheryl and her younger sister Shane went on a double date. They met Andy at a nightclub called Bayou Mamas on Westheimer at South Gessner. The couples spent time together, dancing and enjoying the night. Around 11 p.m., the two couples parted ways. Cheryl and Andy left together in Andy's white Honda Civic. They drove to an area in West Houston known as Lover's Lane. The area was off Enclave Parkway, near Eldridge Parkway. At the time, it was undeveloped land. It was a secluded spot where couples often went for privacy. The area was being prepared for an industrial park, but construction was slow. There were paved roads and cul-de-sacs, but mostly just open fields and lines of trees. When Cheryl did not come home the next morning, her family became worried. She was supposed to go to work, but she never showed up. Her family called the Houston Police Department to report her missing. On August 23rd, a security guard at Cisco Food discovered Andy's white Honda Civic. It was parked in an isolated cul-de-sac in the 1300 block of Enclave Round. The car was abandoned. The engine was off, but the key was still in the ignition, turned to the auxiliary position. The seats were reclined. There was fresh blood in the car, though it was not clear exactly where. Inside, police found Cheryl's purse and shoes on the floorboard, but Cheryl and Andy were nowhere to be seen. Cheryl's family rushed to the scene. Before police arrived, family members and friends were already there, standing near the car. When search dogs were brought in to look for the couple, they led investigators into a wooded area south of the cul-de-sac. What they found was horrific. Police discovered a golf club lying in the field. 3 golf balls were lined up, one after another, pointing in a specific direction. The golf club and balls belonged to Andy. They pointed toward Cheryl's body. She was found hidden under wooden boards, about 400 feet from where the car was parked. She was naked. Her hands had been bound behind her back with duct tape. A rope was wrapped around her neck. Her throat had been cut. She had been sexually assaulted. There was a crisp $20 bill lying next to her body. Above her, tied to a tree, were 4 partially deflated balloons. Andy's body was found nearby, also in the wooded area. He had been tied to a tree with rope. His throat had been slashed so deeply that he was nearly decapitated. The cuts were multiple and severe. Investigators believed that Cheryl had been killed first. This meant that Andy had been tied to the tree while his girlfriend was being attacked and murdered. He would have heard her screaming. He would have known what was going to happen to him next, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Garland Atkinson, Andy's father, later spoke about what police told him. He said it was hard to accept. The thought of his son tied to a tree, helpless, listening to Cheryl being murdered, knowing they were going to do the same thing to him. Garland could not bring himself to go to the morgue to identify his son's body. He said, "You see things on TV and read things in the paper, but you never imagine something that horrific happening to someone you love." The crime scene was bizarre and disturbing. The way the golf balls and club pointed to Cheryl's body suggested the killer wanted her to be found. The $20 bill and the balloons were strange details that investigators could not explain. Some thought the covering of Cheryl's body with wooden boards indicated a personal relationship. Maybe the killer felt remorse or wanted to hide what he had done. The violence used against both victims suggested rage and brutality, but the careful staging of the scene with the golf equipment suggested planning and a desire for attention. The Houston Police Department immediately began investigating. Detectives interviewed everyone who had been at Bayou Mama's that night. They spoke to friends, family members, co-workers, and anyone who might have known Cheryl or Andy. They searched the area for the murder weapon but never found it. They collected DNA evidence from Cheryl's body. Sexual assault had occurred, and the attacker had left behind biological evidence. In 1990, DNA testing was relatively new and expensive, but police knew it could be important. The investigation was thorough. Detective Billy Belk worked the case for about 20 years. He compared the DNA found at the crime scene to at least 25 potential suspects. Every single one was ruled out. The case stayed with him, he later said, because it was one of the few cases he never cleared. When he retired, he felt like he had left unfinished business. The FBI was called in to help. Their profilers created a suspect profile. They believed the suspect may have known Cheryl or Andy or both. They thought he was probably around the same age as the victims. They suggested he had above-average intelligence but was a low achiever. They believed police may have interviewed him at some point during the investigation. The profilers also noted that the way Cheryl's body was covered suggested a prior personal relationship. They thought the suspect may not have intentionally meant to kill Andy, and that Andy might have been killed simply because he was a witness. Some investigators wondered if there was more than one person involved. How could one person subdue two people at the same time? How could one person kill both of them just yards apart from each other? But the DNA evidence only showed one person's genetic material. It seemed likely that there was only one killer. Years passed without a break in the case. The families grieved. Cheryl's mother, Barbara Craig, struggled with the loss of her oldest child. She told reporters years later that she believed if they had let her go to Cheryl when they found her body, she could have breathed life back into her. The memory of losing Cheryl still brought tears decades later. Cheryl's sister Shane, now Shane Craig, said that Cheryl died when she was 22, and she had been gone longer than she had been alive. The pain did not go away. In 2001, 10 years after the murders, someone sent a handwritten letter to the Houston Police Department. The letter promised information about who killed Cheryl Henry and Andy Atkinson, but it would cost $100,000. The return address on the envelope listed Cheryl Henry and Andy Atkinson as the senders. The letter included instructions for police to reply in the classified section of the Houston Chronicle on a specific date. It warned that a lawyer would be hired to make sure police played straight. The police did respond in the classified section, but nothing ever came of it. Investigators believed it might have been someone who had information about the killer, not the killer himself, or it could have been a hoax. Either way, it led nowhere. In 2002, the Houston Police Department DNA lab was closed down. There had been problems with the way it was being run. Hundreds of DNA samples were retested. The DNA evidence from Cheryl and Andy's case was independently retested in 2004. This time, they got a match. The DNA matched DNA collected in an unsolved rape case. And that rape case was from 1990, just 2 months before Cheryl and Andy were murdered. On June 20th, 1990, a 30-year-old exotic dancer who worked at a nightclub called Gigi's was attacked in her home. She left work around 2 a.m. and went to her boyfriend's house in northwest Houston. Her boyfriend was away for work. She ate takeout in the living room and then went upstairs to go to bed. As she approached the bedroom, a man came out wearing a fishnet stocking over his head. He wore black gloves and a dark shirt and dark pants that looked like they could be a uniform, possibly a security guard uniform. He had a gun in his left hand. The man asked her, "Where's Randy?" Randy was her boyfriend's name. She told him Randy was not there. The attacker then bound her hands behind her back with duct tape. He covered her eyes and mouth with tape and put a bag over her head. He terrorized her with the gun. He kept pulling the trigger, cocking and uncocking it over and over, taunting her. Then he raped her. He also robbed her. The entire time, he talked to her, saying vulgar things. The victim described her attacker to police. She said he was in his late 20s to mid-30s. He was about 6 feet tall and weighed around 180 pounds. He had black hair and an olive complexion. She described his stance as very forceful and military-like, as if he had a law enforcement or military background. When police found the DNA match in 2004, they tracked the rape victim down. She was living in Galveston County by then. They interviewed her again and asked her to work with a sketch artist. The victim agreed to help. She worked with Lois Gibson, a famous sketch artist with the Houston Police Department. Together, they created a composite sketch of the attacker. The sketch was also aged to show what he might look like in 2008. The sketch showed a man with dark hair and features consistent with what the victim had described. But there was another stunning connection. The rape victim told police that she had once worked for Andy Atkinson's father, Garland. She had been employed by him at some point before the attack. Police did not know if this was just a crazy coincidence or if the killer might have also worked for Garland at one time. It was possible the killer had come across both women through the nightclub scene. Both Cheryl and the rape victim worked at clubs. Andy sometimes worked the door at his father's club. The killer might have frequented these places or even worked in the industry. Despite having a DNA profile and a composite sketch, the killer's identity remained a mystery. His DNA was not in the National DNA Database, which meant he had never been arrested for a crime that required DNA collection. Or, if he had been arrested, it was before DNA databases became standard. This was frustrating for investigators. They had solid DNA evidence linking one person to 2 violent crimes, but they had no name. In 2017, Detective Darkus Shorten was working on the case. She hoped that new technology could help. She talked about familial DNA testing. This is a relatively new technique that uses data from sites like Ancestry and 23andMe. If a suspect's family member has submitted their DNA to one of these sites, investigators can potentially find a match. The family member's DNA would show genetic markers that indicate a relationship. Police could then use that information as probable cause to get a DNA sample from the actual targeted person. Familial DNA had been used to crack a number of cold cases in Houston and around the country. Detective Shorten was hopeful it could work for the Lover's Lane case. By 2017, investigators had another theory. They believed the killer may have frequented strip clubs or worked at them. That is how he could have come across both victims. Cheryl worked at Rick's Cabaret. Andy worked the door at Dreams Street. The rape victim worked at Gigi's. All of these were clubs in the Houston area. Maybe the killer had a connection to this world. Detective Shorten also speculated that the killer may have known Cheryl specifically. The way the crime scene was staged suggested he wanted the bodies to be found. The $20 bill was odd. Could the killer have frequented clubs where tipping was common? Did he leave the $20 bill as some kind of message or signature? There were other strange details. The 4 balloons tied to the tree above Cheryl's body were never explained. What did they mean? Were they left there by the killer, or were they already there? The wooden boards that covered Cheryl's body also seemed significant. Why cover her body, but not Andy's? Did this suggest shame or remorse, or was it just to hide her from view for a little longer? As the years went on, the case remained unsolved. The families never gave up hope. In 2023, a family member bought a full-page newspaper ad in the Houston Chronicle. The ad urged anyone with new leads in the case to come forward. It highlighted the desperation and the relentless pursuit of justice by Cheryl and Andy's families. The ad received widespread attention, but no significant new developments emerged. The area where Cheryl and Andy were killed has changed dramatically. In 1990, it was empty fields and lines of trees. Today, Enclave Parkway is a well-developed business corridor, mid-rise buildings and a parking garage stand where Cheryl and Andy were found. It is hard to recognize the area from old aerial photos that show large, undeveloped tracts of land. But the memories have not faded for the families. Barbara Craig, Cheryl's mother, wears Cheryl's ring and watch. She envisions her daughter in heaven. In her mind, she can see Cheryl holding other people who were traumatized too, letting them know they are fine now. Meredith Colvert said she can close her eyes and go back to that night just like yesterday. She has gotten sick to her stomach thinking about what Cheryl and Andy endured. Garland Atkinson has also kept his son's memory alive. He has spoken publicly about the case and advocated for justice. He told reporters that Cheryl and Andy's families were also given a life sentence the day the young couple died. The Lovers Lane murders remain one of Houston's most notorious unsolved homicides. The case has everything investigators need to solve it: strong DNA evidence, a DNA link to another crime, a composite sketch, and detailed witness testimony. But they are still missing the most important piece: the identity of the killer. The Houston Police Department's Cold Case Squad continues to work on the case. They remain hopeful that advances in forensic genealogy will eventually provide the break they need. As more people submit their DNA to ancestry websites, the chances of finding a familial match increase. It is possible that someone related to the killer has already submitted their DNA and just does not know it yet. Some investigators have wondered if the killer committed other crimes. Are there other unsolved rapes or murders in the Houston area that might be connected? Some have suggested that a woman named Tara Suzette Breckenridge, who was also murdered in Houston, might have been killed by the same person. But without DNA evidence to compare, it is impossible to know. The case has been featured on numerous true crime podcasts and television shows. It has been the subject of articles and documentaries. The story of Cheryl Henry and Andy Atkinson has captured the attention of people across the country. Everyone wants to know who killed them and why. Everyone hopes that one day, justice will be served. The families continue to wait. They have waited over 34 years now. Every year that passes without resolution deepens the pain, but they refuse to give up. They believe that someday, someone will come forward with information, or someday, the DNA will finally match a name in a database, or someday, a family member of the killer will submit their DNA to an ancestry site, and investigators will get the break they need. Until then, Cheryl Henry and Andy Atkinson's murders remain unsolved. Two young people in love, with their whole lives ahead of them, brutally killed on a summer night in 1990. Their families still grieve. The Houston community still remembers, and somewhere out there, a killer has never been held accountable for what he did that night. The case shows both the power and the limitations of DNA evidence. Having a DNA profile is incredibly valuable. It can definitively rule people out. It can link crimes together. But if the person is not in the database, the DNA alone cannot identify them. This is why familial DNA testing has become so important. It gives investigators another tool to potentially identify suspects even when they are not in the system themselves. The Lovers Lane murders also highlight how crimes can be connected years or even decades later. If DNA testing had been more common and less expensive in 1990, the rape case and the murders might have been linked much sooner. The rape victim might have been interviewed again while her memories were fresher. The composite sketch might have been created earlier. Maybe the investigation would have taken a different direction. But technology was different then. DNA testing was cutting edge and costly. Many police departments did not have the resources to test every piece of evidence. Rape kits often sat on shelves for years before being processed. This was the case in Houston and in many other cities across the country. It was not until the Houston PD DNA lab was closed and evidence was retested that the connection between the two crimes was discovered. By then, 14 years had passed. Today, as of 2025, the case remains open. The Houston Police Department continues to investigate. They encourage anyone with information to come forward. They believe that someone out there knows something. Maybe someone knew the killer back in 1990. Maybe they noticed strange behavior around that time. Maybe they have information that seemed insignificant at the time but could be important now. Crime Stoppers is offering a reward for information that leads to an arrest. The families are desperate for answers. They want to know who killed Cheryl and Andy. They want justice. They want the killer to be held accountable. The Lovers Lane murders are a reminder that evil exists in the world, that violence can happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time. Cheryl and Andy were just two young people in love, enjoying a night out. They went to a place where couples often went for privacy. They had no reason to think they were in danger, but someone was waiting in those woods that night, or someone followed them there. And that person destroyed two lives and devastated two families. The case also shows the dedication of law enforcement and the families who refuse to give up. Detective Billy Belk worked the case for 20 years. Detective Darkus Shorten took it on and pursued new avenues with familial DNA. The families have kept the case in the public eye, hoping that someone will come forward. They bought newspaper ads. They have spoken to the media. They have never stopped fighting for justice. Cheryl Henry was 22 years old. Andy Atkinson was 21. They should have had long lives ahead of them. They should have gotten married, had children, grown old together. Instead, their lives were cut short in the most brutal way imaginable. Their story is a tragedy, but it is also a story of hope. Hope that one day, the killer will be identified. Hope that justice will finally be served. Hope that families can have closure after more than 3 decades of waiting. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.